Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. The players begin to move. You know, I'm so glad we could come to an agreement. You say that, and yet you're really enjoying looking quite smug about this, Ichigo stated in annoyance, reluctantly standing by the side of Zeref and God Serena as they waited on one of Zeref's Spriggan 12 to reach them. If I wasn't needed to vouch for you and this plan, I would have left you here an hour ago. And yet here you are, Zeref replied in amusement. Lead around by my biting. What's wrong? Considering your time with the Magic Council, I thought you were used to being a dog. Ichigo sighed loudly, counting back from 10 to stop himself from doing something he knew he wouldn't regret. Just remember your end of the bargain. That's the whole reason any of us agreed to this whole situation. I have not forgotten. Crossing his arms, Zeref frowned in annoyance. I didn't think I would be the one responsible for orchestrating the freedom of the Celestial Spirit King 2 times though. It's really such a shame. I wasted so much to draw him into the trap. To let him go after all that hard work and sacrifice. Well, not that it will matter too much. He could very well die in the upcoming battle. One that you are running away from like a coward, oh great Emperor Spriggan. I wonder what your little army would think if they learned of just the kind of person their leader truly was. Say anything and I shall kill you. You tried, Ichigo shot back. And look. I'm still alive. You tried to break me too, and I'm still holding on. Want to fail for a third time? Enough, please, God Serena muttered. You are running the setting. The great battle approaches. I do not want to remember it containing the squabbling of children. You want to repeat that? Zeref demanded, his head snapping towards God Serena. Silence met him, only infuriating him further. If you weren't so important dash. You'd kill me, right? Of course, I understand. After all, I am the star of this play. You can't remove the lead character, no matter how much you may want to. I'm not some disposable side character for you to remove when you get annoyed. That doesn't mean I can't make you suffer until the fight. Besides, you are important but you aren't the star. Many will stand tall in that fight. Like your little brother, right? Ichigo smirked as Zeref's head snapped towards him, the dark mage's expression frozen in a blank state. I managed to see the last bits that mattered on his identity. Natsu Dragneel. Which makes you Zeref Dragneel, I suppose. You. No. Impossible. Those memories. They should have hidden him. What did you do? Where did you learn of this? Your memories covered him up quite well. Except during one moment. You probably forgot to censor him at the time when you realized he was dead. That's when I finally saw him for who he was. So it was that memory. I should have been more careful. I have to ask though, while I have the chance, Ichigo stated quickly. How did Natsu get here? He died 400 years ago. Did you only revive him recently? I'd love to say you did, but something kept bugging me about that. There's only one demon you haven't unleashed on us all, and he's meant to be the strongest of them all. Only reason that I can think of to explain why you haven't is because you can't. Because he's not a demon under your control. A demon with the powers of a dragon slayer, God Serena muttered. This show won't be lacking in stars, will it? They should make me glow all the more brighter. God Serena summed it up. Kind of. Ichigo threw an arm back towards the barrier, gesturing into the distance. Revival seems to be a trickier thing. People have come back, but look at how. The future versions of my friend came back more tainted than ever. And the others that have been revived, they tend to be linked to you. Grey came back as a demon. Hades' soul took over one of your demon's bodies. And even the elites of your demon army could be revived quite easily at your base. Revival seems to be much easier when demons get involved, doesn't it? And that's what Natsu is. The name of END isn't meant to refer to the end of the world like many believe, but the end of your research and goals. Am I wrong? Yes, Zeref snarled. END actual does refer to the end of the world. You've seen my memories. So you must also realize what END must mean. You just don't want to say it. But I have no quarrels. Spreading his arms Ziraf shouted at the top of his lungs, I hate this world. Not a good emotion to throw at the world right now, you know, God Serena muttered. But hey, your funeral. Make our benefactor anger if you want to. Magic's smart enough to know what I mean, Ziraf shot back. I'm caught in countless contradictions. I hate magic, yet I love it. I wish to die, yet I make moves to live. I want everything to end, yet I wish for it to continue forever. When I say I hate the world, magic is more than capable of seeing what I truly desire. Besides, even if I did try and lash out at it, I'm sure it would just accept me anyway. And why is that? Ichigo asked. Despite a call to arms, you're so sure you'll be fine ignoring the summons. Because I'm its most beloved child, Ziraf spat out. All of you can live for years and years, each with a way to prolong life thanks to your magic. In our last fight, how many times did your blades cut me? How many times did I die in that battle? I know how many. I keep track, and not once in 400 years has magic allowed me to even get near even the concept of my death. Whatever I do, magic will allow it. The same for any that follow me. All because it is obsessed with keeping me alive. And lucky for it that I don't hate it enough to utilize magical barrier particles against it. I'm not the type to trade one eternal master for another. And besides, Ziraf added in amusement. Destroying the world is very different from destroying magic. This world is the one that's corrupt. That's twisted. That is what I decided 400 years ago. So long as magic remains, it hardly cares if I break this world once or twice. If I have to wage war again and again to bring about a better world, then that's a willing sacrifice for me to make, and I doubt I'll ever need to worry about wasting time in such endeavors. That's the one thing I can never run out of. Explains why you waited for so long after your last attempt, Ichigo muttered in annoyance. You just let people believe you died and plotted in secret. One thing I don't understand is why you didn't stop once you brought Natsu back. He's alive. Isn't he? I suppose you could say he's living, Ziraf stated, annoyed himself at the line of questioning. But alive? No. The body moves but the mind forgets. He's a puppet on strings, breathing so long as I draw breath. That's not being alive. He's nothing more than a glorified servant like those old celestial spirits that Giant once made. Without the creator, without a link tying them down, they perish. Natsu is the same. You should be happy about that though, Ziraf added, taking on a carefree tone. A puppet can be repaired. It doesn't matter how many times he breaks in this fight. I'll fix him and make him fight again and again. Even Acknowledge fears End, because he is one of the few beings capable of posing a threat to him. Not many can share that right, and almost none do outside of us Ukin. Glancing over his shoulder as a large magical presence began to make itself known, Ziraf smirked at the sight of a familiar old man approaching. It seems August has finally arrived. That old man? Ichigo asked, glancing at the man in question before his eyes began to narrow. The magic around him. Not Ukin. Not like Pernida either. The way it acts too. Magic King. Oh, so you're familiar with the term. I did enough research in the Holy Palace to learn about what I was. I saw references to that term. The reaction I see matches what the book suggested to be expected. Indeed. I was quite surprised myself when I found him as a child. Such potential. I doubted his ability for some time until I took him to the Holy Palace. And from that moment he awoke and became something else entirely. We may have all the magical power we need. But he has all the magic he needs. And yet he still serves me, despite knowing the truth. How doesn't he know you're an Ukin? I'm sure he does, muttered Ziraf. And yet he says nothing. But that isn't your business. Go and get your friends from the barrier. I will wait here for you to return. Go. Fetch. If you aren't here when they return, I'll hunt you down myself. And I'll do that anyway if you lied in any way about the Celestial Spirit King. I didn't lie, Ziraf shot back as Ichigo began to head off towards the barrier. Remember, head to the deepest point of my palace. There you'll find the one responsible for sealing the Celestial Spirit King away. You'll understand how to release him once you get there. I heard you the first time, Spriggan, Ichigo spat out, disappearing in a burst of speed as he headed towards the barrier. Waiting until he was sure Ichigo was gone, Ziraf sighed in disappointment as he lowered the hand he has used in mocking farewell. Such a shame, Ziraf muttered. I'm almost tempted to go with them. I had so hoped to see that abomination's face when he sees how I've been keeping the Celestial Spirit King trapped. Isn't the dungeons where that screaming was? God, Serena muttered. Christ, what did you do down there anyway? You never went to take a look. I'm not sadistic. I refused when Jin offered. Wise perhaps. Even I feel a tiny bit wary when I go down there. Still, I'd brave it. We will do anything for things we derive enjoyment was. August, hurry up. Yes my lord, August said as he quickly closed the remaining distance, bowing his head before Ziraf. Emperor Spriggan, it is good to see you are in good spirits. You can tell? You always were quite good at noticing things, August. August took the praise with a soft smile. Might I inquire the reason, your majesty? Your message was quite urgent, but considering the timing. Might I assume the plan is underway? It is indeed, Ziraf stated. We must wait until the abomination leaves first though. He will retaliate if he realizes what I have planned. I'll need you to also let Irene know that she should begin preparations to cast Universe 1 and get ready for battle. Acknowledge will be wary if all the Dragon Slayers gather together. He will believe a trap is approaching and will react smartly. We don't want that. So we'll place down a target that he could never ignore and will charge towards with all his anger. A target? Is there anything he hates more than Dragon Slayers? Oh, there is one thing, Ziraf pointed out, smirking all the while. It's the thing that began it all. A dragon. Protector of the fairies. So you're saying Ziraf is out there right now? Asked Sting as he slammed his hands against the table. And that he's Spriggan? The same Spriggan that leads Alvarez? Why aren't we rushing out right now to kill him? He's the enemy leader. It's not that easy to do, Shunsui said calmly. And keep your voice down. We don't want this information to spread. Sting frowned. Why not? Does Alvarez know this? If we let everyone know, surely they'd be thrown into disarray. And so would we, Ichigo pointed out. This lie of his is sneaky. It's pulled us around like headless chickens. But imagine the reaction of the average person to this kind of information. They'd learn that Ziraf has been fighting us with two armies at once, one of which he may have very well abandoned on a whim. To make it worse, Alvarez was the largest army out of all of them in the beginning and even now it still has overwhelming numbers. Whatever disarray that Alvarez would gain from learning the truth themselves would be much less impactful than the damage it would do to our side. Ziraf can always keep his army in line through force and fear if need be, or replace it entirely if they prove a hindrance. Sting swore, pacing around the table a few times as he tried to take in the information calmly. What about me? He asked. Why tell me this? It's nice that you believed I could handle it dash. That wasn't the reason. But why tell me? Is it because I'm strong? Because of my magic? Something like that, Shunsui stated. Ichigo, if you would. Ichigo nodded. We've formed an alliance. Sort of. It's short-term really, for one main purpose. Killing Acknowledge. And you reached out to me because you need me, Sting realized. Because I'm the Dragon Slayer. That's right, Shunsui replied. Under normal circumstances we'd be gathering up all the mages we could. But Acknowledge. The general let out a long sigh. He's in another class entirely. I heard rumors that guildarts from Fairy Tail once fought him, and lost in a few seconds. Don't know how much truth there is to such rumors, but if even a fragment of truth remains then it's enough to know numbers won't solve anything. Not to mention that Acknowledge is responsible for wiping out all the dragons that lived 400 years ago, Ichigo added. Beings that powerful fell to him with what we can only hope wasn't ease. As it stands, in this alliance we have only 7 Dragon Slayers that I know of. One may be incredibly powerful on the enemy's side, but on our side one of ours is a kid. She's skilled alright but is a few years off reaching her full potential like the others we have are. Honestly, the odds aren't that good. But as much as we'd love it, Acknowledge isn't a problem that will be going away by itself. If you don't feel like you're up to it dash. No, I'll do it, Sting stated. I can fight him. That's good, Shunsui stated happily. I'll go and request a messenger to inform the others. Ichigo, will you be staying much longer? Ichigo shook his head. I'd fight if I could, but there's an equally dangerous problem elsewhere. It's just unfortunate that it had to happen now, but there's little doubt that Acknowledge will take advantage of my absence. I'll try and hurry back if I can, but don't count me arriving to help anytime soon. Alright then. I'll let the others know for you. Best of luck at wiping out whatever that disturbance earlier was. Whatever it was, it certainly didn't feel right. Be safe. Well, I guess I should go get some rest before the big fight, Sting said as Shunsui left, beginning to walk past when a hand grabbed him by the arm. Huh? What is it? Your magical power when you use your dual element mode. How much do you know about it? You mean in my White Shadow Dragon mode? Sting frowned, tabbing his fingers against his other hand as he let his mind wander. Well, I know that everything feels much stronger. Stronger than it probably does for Natsu and Gajeel in their dual element modes. And it's so much easier to regain magic. I can just draw it in from the air. I think I'm eating the energy around me when I do that, to be honest. Good. If you're aware of all that, then you should be able to fight more easily. Of course, Sting said as his arm was released. What's this about anyway? You think I'm a weak link or something? Not really, Ichigo muttered. Just a warning. Acknowledge's magical power is almost a perfect match for your own. What I'm hoping is that this means that you are well suited to fighting him. Almost a perfect match? Asked Sting uncertainly. You realized I'm a White Dragon Slayer, right? I do. But I'm only pointing out what I've noticed. The abilities you can use in that mode match up to his own usage of similar ones, and the magical power in that mode is too similar. But this does mean you hold an advantage. You're pretty much a hard counter to Acknowledge by sharing his power. Remember then when you fight him. It might just save your life. Or someone else's. Will do, Sting stated seriously. Just one question. You fought Acknowledge before. Any idea of what to expect? Any warnings you can share? Some, replied Ichigo. He'll change form. Be ready for that. He's much faster when he's shaped like a human. Watch out for his attacks. He can end the fight in one blow if you let your guard down. And most importantly, do not give him time to prepare a proper breath attack. If he does, you'll all be hard-pressed to survive. Acknowledge's breath attacks aren't meant to wipe out single or multiple enemies but entire battlefields in one blast. Don't let him use it, else that will be the end of all of you. Protector of the Fairies. So let me get this straight, Laxus growled out, staring straight at Byakuya and wishing the man would look even a little bit unsettled by that. We're teaming up with Zeref? Zeref of all people. He is to be referred to as Spriggan outside of these walls, but yes, that is the general consensus we have all come to. And who out of all those people think this is an idea? Ichigo was one of them. Does that help? He didn't mention any of this to me, Laxus growled, doing his best to rein in his temper. Is Ichigo a part of this operation? No. He apparently has business elsewhere. I see. So at least this isn't some large plan he had tried to keep me hidden from. So? The goal of this is to defeat Acknowledge, right? You are correct, replied Byakuya. The objective is to fight and kill the beast known as Acknowledge. That is the extent of this alliance. Which means afterwards we can be stabbed in the back. Am I wrong? Byakuya shook his head. You aren't wrong. Which is why I am giving you a secondary order. To capture Zeref the moment our alliance ends. Yeah, easier said than done, Laxus growled out. You want to try and capture him after fighting something as powerful as Acknowledge? Good luck. I won't have the strength after a fight like that. I wouldn't be able to afford holding back, and unless I'm at full strength I won't stand a chance. You won't. But another might. I am familiar with your friend's work with words. Levi McGarden, wasn't it? No. That was faster than I predicted. Absolutely no, Laxus snarled. It's bad enough you're also telling me to take Wendy to that battlefield. She's a goddamn kid and you want her to fight against a monster that could kill people 3 times her age with a single sweep of his arm. She is a dragon slayer. Her age is no longer important, and she is one of the greatest healers alive. In the coming fight you cannot afford to not have her. I know that, replied Laxus angrily. Why do you think I've forced myself to agree to this? But Levi isn't a dragon slayer. In this fight she'd be nothing but a hindrance. Her attacks wouldn't even scratch Acknowledge's scales. Which is why she won't be. Her primary role will only exist after the battle has ended. And until that point she'll be right by the most dangerous dark mage of all time. You underestimate her, Byakuya stated. She may not be capable of beating him, but I have heard and seen many of her fights. She plays dirty. She uses everything she can to grasp at victory, and will hide her true hand for as long as possible if it means ensuring she wins. Not many others would be capable of hiding their plan of action from Zeref when standing so close to him. We plan to give her some Sekizeki cuffs to pull out and seal his magic with. Even if it doesn't completely disable him, it will be enough to buy the rest of us time to move in before Alvarez can. And I'm to believe Zeref will be fine with all of this, having her by his side. He should be. He requested her. Laxus froze. What? That's what the message Ichigo asked to be passed along said? Well, to be precise, it seems Zeref requested someone skilled at manipulating and writing with word-based languages. But he said it was pretty implied that the one he wanted was her. Laxus had to try very hard to not break the table in front of him right now. Did Ichigo say why Zeref wanted this? No. He said things would be clear at the time. I assume there was information he didn't want me to know. Information intended for the ears of you and the others only. Beyond that, all I have are coordinates that take you to outside of the barrier near Alvarez's army. That is apparently the meeting point for everyone. We really aren't wasting time with this, Laxus muttered in annoyance. When do we meet? As soon as possible. Apparently the actual operation will begin in a few days though. Bait is being prepared to draw Acknowledge in. You mean us? Potentially. Acknowledge is known to hunt dragons relentlessly in the past. It's unlikely this had changed now, and considering your appearance I'm sure he'd find a reason to come even if he didn't care about the others, if just to try and kill you. Well, that's reassuring. I'm the favorite target of a dragon of destruction. Can this even get any worse? Acknowledge isn't here yet. It can always get worse until then. Protector of the Fairies. Sir, I have news from the front. Juoshiro gave a nod to the messenger, listening to it carefully through one ear as he continued reading the plans in front of him. Multitasking was a well-practiced skill for him, one he had initially thought would have dulled in retirement. Thankful it hadn't too much and made managing all the different reports and plan proposals that came in easy to do, even when in constant meetings with the others. Most messages anyway tended to be fairly simple reports, giving him the direct factors he might need then and there to make a decision and. He cut off that line of thought at the mere mention of Acknowledge's name, looking up from the plans and giving the messenger his undivided attention. He waited patiently for the man to reach the end, before finally giving a nod of acknowledgement and thanking the man for his hard work. The man hadn't even left the room yet before he was sinking deep into his thoughts, his mind racing a mile a minute. Acknowledge was making a move. This honestly wasn't good. Not in the slightest. He had hoped and prayed that the beast would have stayed quiet for a bit longer. He had even held out a small piece of hope that the dragon would go to sleep and not wake up for a few years. That could have been enough time to recover from the war and prepare to fight once again. But now they only had days at best. Acknowledge could make a move any time before or after then, but if this so-called plan worked then they could at least fight the dragon on their own terms. Own terms? He shook his head at the mere thought of that. This wasn't on their terms. It was on the enemy's. The messenger had said there was additional information of relevance, about the enemy leader Spriggan, so he would have to contact Shunsui for that later. But that wouldn't change the fact that Spriggan would be sure to stack the deck in his favor when it all ends. He was the one drawing in allies for this fight and preparing to lure Acknowledge in. He wouldn't do that if he wasn't confident enough that he had a chance, and there was no way of knowing what kind of secrets he had prepared, for both and after the fight. A quick use of magic and he had an archive screen open, quickly using it to speak to his old friend. Shunsui couldn't speak for long, and neither could he either, but it gave him all that he needed to know. Zeref was Spriggan. Well, he supposed that answered what Spriggan looked like. No one had seen him, but then no one had known what Zeref looked like either before he revealed himself to a few of them. He wondered how many in Alvarez knew the truth. Was the face of Zeref merely Spriggan to them? Had Zeref buried his own identity to create this new one? Though he was surprised he had never noticed anything. He'd been held in Alvarez for a decent amount of time. The memories of that time though were hazy. Half the time he felt like he was dreaming whenever he remembered them. Perhaps he had seen Zeref's face in one of them and had merely forgotten it. It was hard to tell sometimes with him getting older too. His memories aside, one problem still remained. Zeref would be sure to try and gain an advantage by the end of this, so how could they counteract that? Perhaps it was worth preparing a strike force to move in when the threat was clear. He shook his head at the idea. That wouldn't work. They'd be more likely to die by accident from Acknowledge's widespread attacks before they could do anything, and even if they survived they would probably be too weak to beat Zeref. Considering the reports of the man's immortality too, killing him was not an easy task. From what they knew, Zeref recovered from his injuries. He felt the pain, took the blow, and then reverted back. Large-scale blows might hinder it for a bit longer, but he still weathered those attacks. He frowned as an option came to him. A horrible one, but an option nonetheless. Glancing careful at a map, he eyed the area where it looked like the battle against Acknowledge would take place. It was close to the barrier, but the barrier was strong. And it would only be the blast radius that would be the problem, right? Could it work? Acknowledge was powerful, but this trump card was also. It could even wipe Zeref out entirely, and if they were lucky prevent him from reverting back to his original state. It was risky. Extremely. But what choice did he have? He had to make the hard choices sometimes, based on the situation. And 7 Dragon Slayers against Acknowledge was not a battle that would end favorable to them. 7 lives were nothing to lose compared to how many others could die. And so with a heavy heart, he rose from his chair and began to seek out the others. For this plan he would need their approval. And failing that, there was always the option of taking matters into his own hands. He knew the codes. He could fire it manually if need be. Yes, it was probably worth being prepared just in case. Doran Bolt. The man appeared by his side immediately, and it was stuff like that which reminded him of how grateful he was that the man had approached him and offered to help when the war began. And with his illness getting worse with every passing day, it was helpful to have someone who could be his proxy at a moment's notice. I need you to go and inform the others I'm calling an emergency meeting. And please, knock on the Queen's door this time. She doesn't like people teleporting in unexpectedly. Of course, sir. And like that, the teleporter was gone. Such a helpful magic, he admitted to himself. A shame he had never tried to learn it. Not that he would have had the talent for it. His skills had always been in other areas. Sighing as his thoughts inevitably drifted back to what he was about to request, he hoped that if there was a god out there that it was feeling merciful. Please forgive me, brave dragon slayers, he muttered to himself as he walked. But we must pray to the sacred light for victory this time. Protector of the fairies. A loud growl slowly began to escape his throat as his eyes began to open. Was day breaking? Or was it already becoming night? The light shone through the entrance to his cave and he let his eyes settle on it for a few minutes, watching as it slowly began to dim until he was plunged into darkness once more. How long had he been sleeping for? A few hours? A few days? It was so easy to lose track of time when he had nothing to do but wait. 400 years had flown by because of that, but right now it was a nuisance more than anything else. Every time he exerted himself in battle, he always needed to go and rest to recover his strength. An amusing thought crossed his mind, a loud chuckle being released as it echoed around the cave. Was he getting old? He supposed it was possible. He hadn't exactly been in the peak of youth when he became the thing he was now. Some of his lifespan had already been used up by the time he changed, and he had no way of knowing just how long he could live either. He wasn't human, but was he truly the same as the dragons he killed? Well, so long as the only thing that age was doing to him was making him sleep for longer, that was fine with him. He wouldn't have to care about such things soon anyway. The time for it all to end was getting nearer. How many remained? 7 distinct smells reached him, one even stronger than before. Was that? He growled in realization, this time out of fury rather than amusement. Dragonification. One of the dragon slayers was getting closer and closer to the existence he despised the most. There could be no doubt it was the blonde-haired one from before. The process had already begun, and whatever had occurred recently while he was asleep has changed things significantly. And then there was END. Out of all of them, E.N.D worried him. That demon was Ziref's greatest, the pinnacle of work that he had achieved. Considering that Ziref's talents lay in the creation of such powerful forms of life, down to every last detail of their bodies and magic, END was an enemy to be wary of. The fact he was a dragon slayer could be no accident. This was Ziref's trump card against him. And then there was that odd sensation he felt from the lone dragon slayer to the west. Every time he smelled that scent, it was different than the last. It seemed to cycle through 8 different sensations, and on rare occasions a 9th that actual felt dangerous. Which should he go after first? He was tired of all of this, and he had been patient long enough. His debt to Ziref was paid. He had held back a good while, but now he wouldn't be denied his prize any longer. The only question was which would be the target he desired the most right now. He could go for END first. Eliminate the possibility of him being awoken. But first he would have to break through the barrier. Against his strength it would break, but that would mean heading straight into that hybrid's territory. Ichigo Kurosaki. He wasn't a dragon slayer, but he was a threat. But he remembered fighting him. Collateral damage would be his weakness. It didn't matter how strong that hybrid was if he kept throwing himself into the way of his breath attacks to try and stop them. Losing a few tens of thousands of soldiers would be unacceptable in the hybrid's mind. And risking letting an attack go wild and hit the havens for hundreds of thousands of civilians. He wouldn't take the risk. He was almost tempted to go ahead and charge in right now. Only he knew that there were more dangers than just one. Other Okin still guarded this land. He could beat any of them with ease. They couldn't match his raw power. But what about if 2 gathered? 3? 4? What if the dragon slayers all arrived and tried to take advantage of his fight? He was the king of these skies, but he could still fall from them. Perhaps it would be best then to aim for the lone dragon slayer first. Eliminate him and then move on to the next. He was fast. If he smashed through the barrier, he could charge straight towards the dragon slayers one by one, leaving destruction in his wake. And if he ensured a large enough hole was left open for Alvarez to follow, they'd very easily force some of the threats away. Except, he didn't want that. Why should he be afraid? He was strong. He was powerful. And right now, he didn't feel like he could lose. What was wrong with going on a rampage? That is what beings such as him should do, was it not? This was why he had suffered, so why not make others feel his pain as he neared the end of this journey? Yes, that ideal amused him. How would END look as his family burns around him? He had seemed close to the other dragon slayer. And if memory served, they had been with others back on that island he had first seen them on. With 2 other dragon slayers and their friends. How would they feel if he killed them all? Would they cry? Scream at him in fury? Smile in happiness? He'd seen the latter more than a few times, and each of those individuals always tended to turn out rather odd. But also interesting. What about the other dragon slayer? The one that smelled like ice. Was he as brittle as ice was? Would he shatter just as easily? A smile slowly formed as imagined the scene. And what about the final dragon slayer? Out of all of them, he was the one that bothered him the most. The way he smelled was too peaceful. It made him think of things he had forgotten, things he wanted to remain forgotten. You very pessimistic, you know. He growled angrily. Be quiet, he muttered. How interesting. You hate them. You loathe them. I haven't seen that kind of hatred in someone in a long time now. Enough. He roared, nothing but the echo of his own voice being heard to his ears. And yet he could still hear that taunting tone in his head. Wants to save dash, he roared even louder, his tail smashing into the rocks as he forced himself up and lashed out against the walls. The cave was collapsing around him, but he didn't care, trying to drown out the words he could hear. Drawing out magic, he released it in one deafening roar, shattering the whole mountain he had been resting in and finally causing the voices to fall quiet. He ignored the rocks as they landed around him, some of them bouncing off his scales and not even leaving a dent. He was angry. Thinking about all that had done away with any attempts of remaining calm. He wanted to kill something. He needed to kill something. Dragons, acknowledge, he muttered in rage. Dragons, 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 dragons. Why was he hesitating still? There were 7 dragons ripe for the slaughter. And he was the one who had slaughtered the hundreds and hundreds that had lived 400 years ago. 7 immature dragon slayers was nothing to him. He would rip them limb from limb and let their blood splatter against his scales. He would feast on their flesh and dye his claws red. And he wouldn't stop until all of them were dead. No one could stop him. No one had the right to. Because he was the one who won, and had kept on winning. The true king of all dragons, the one who would destroy anything and everything in his path. He was Acknowledge, the bringer of catastrophe. And he would not be denied the revenge he sought. 7 more, he growled. Only 7 more left. Then I'll finally have avenged you. Then we can both rest peacefully. Protector of the fairies. The end. Of the Dragon Slayer. I don't like this. Doesn't matter, replied Laxus, ignoring the Fire Dragon Slayer's protests. What we want doesn't really play any role here. The option of avoiding this is worse. I know that, Natsu shot back, annoyed at the whole situation. Doesn't stop me from not liking any of this. I don't trust Ziref or Spriggan or whatever his name is meant to actual be. Good for you. If any of us did, I'd say they'd be either lying or stupid. Regardless, he's the one who organized this. And he has a dragon slayer of his own. Against Acknowledge, even a single person's worth of firepower is enough of a risk to take with him. No offense to anyone in particular here, Gajeel said, speaking up in between chewing on a few pieces of iron he had brought with him for the short journey, but what's with the girl? I'm a dragon slayer. Wendy stated in indignation. I can help. Not you, brat. Levy. A few of them glanced at Levy curiously, expecting any answer from her, while she merely glanced at Laxus, who seemed determined to keep his gaze forward, beginning to leave them all behind as he stormed ahead. Wish I knew, Levy muttered. Apparently I was requested, though in less specific terms. Something about my skill set being necessary. No idea really about why. Does it matter too much? Taoshiro asked, one hand awkwardly resting against the back of his head as close to his sword's hilt as it could be without looking suspicious. Ziref obviously has something planned. He'll tell us when we reach him, so it's best to just expect answers then. And be prepared for a double cross right now. You don't really think he'll really double cross us? Wendy asked, briefly hesitating over some of the words as if she didn't believe in them herself. Shouldn't we be on the same side against Acknowledge? Sides meant pretty little when the cards are down, growled Gajeel in annoyance. People do what serves their own interests. I should know. Phantom Lord let us do whatever the hell we wanted, and even that barely kept some of us loyal. I might not be the nicest or kindest guy out there, but I could have been a lot worse. Imagine someone completely driven by their own desires like Ziref, and then imagine him not taking the paths that grant him what he desires, even at the cost of everything else. For us, it's less of a matter of thinking if he will betray us and focusing more on the when. Hurry up, you lot, Laxus called back to them, already much further ahead and having stopped to wait for them. The reason why became apparent as they rushed to catch up, figures beginning to become visible up ahead. A small wooden structure seemed to have been built, looking oddly out of place in the wide open battlefield, and in front of it stood 2 individuals waiting for them. Be careful, Laxus hissed at them as they approached, his eyes warily watching the two individuals standing in front of the house. Be on the lookout for anything. Welcome, greeted the old man standing before them, bowing his head slightly at their arrival. I am thankful you agreed to meet with us. Emperor Spriggan will be most pleased to see you have all arrived safely. Spriggan, he says, Gajeel growled out, ignoring the odd look the old man gave him. Whatever, let's just go in already. You should watch your tongue in there, the woman stated, leaning against her staff casually as she observed each and every one of them. Her eyes lingered briefly on Laxus for a moment, appearing to light up in pain, before she tore her gaze away and brought them back to Gajeel. Emperor Spriggan can be very lenient in the way he allows people to speak to him, but that won't stop him from eliminating you if he feels insulted. It would be such a shame to lose a dragon slayer at the eve of such a dangerous hour. I'll behave, Gajeel growled out, frowning for a moment as he sniffed the air. Huh, he muttered, glancing over at the woman. You smell familiar. Looks familiar too, he heard Wendy whisper beneath her breath. It wasn't quiet enough, it seemed, as the woman seemed to have an annoyed look on her face, as if remembering something unpleasant. If you are done out here, I'd appreciate your haste. Emperor Spriggan does not like to be kept waiting. You two aren't joining us? Laxus asked. The old man shook his head. We have business elsewhere. I must get back to our people while my companion must continue preparing the battlefield. She merely stopped by to get a look at the people she would be working with. Working with? Laxus frowned, sniffing the air himself like many of the other dragon slayers had already done. There was an odd scent on her, and an odd feeling from the magic she radiated. To him, it even seemed familiar. Sort of like his own even. Dragon magic? Dragon blood? Whatever she was, whatever power she possessed, she was somehow linked to dragons. That scent was too undeniable, even if it had taken being so close to her to even pick it up. He just wished he could identify what it was. He could swear that he was so close to identifying it. He didn't get a chance to try further though, as both of the mages that greeted him were quick to leave, vanishing as a magic circle lit up beneath the two of them. I wasn't imagining that, was I? Gajeel asked out loud to the rest of them, still looking at where the woman had been. Did you see that red hair? And that scent of hers? She smells like Urza, Wendy muttered quietly. More dragon-like. But still like Urza. You're overthinking things, aren't you? Asked Toshiro, not looking entirely convinced by his own words. There's a resemblance, sure, but if she had any connection to Urza, I'm sure she would have raised it herself when we started fighting Alvarez. That's only if she knew anything, pointed out Levi. Urza doesn't know who her family was. She grew up as an orphan in her village. But we can't just assume they're linked somehow. Is your scent thing really that reliable? I would have agreed with you 7 years ago, Toshiro replied. Now though? Well, I at least trust my nose enough to realize sometimes there is meaning in what we can smell. The others could still be overthinking things, but them smelling something familiar has to mean something. What about you? Huh? Levi scowled at him. You said the others smelling something familiar has to mean something. What about you? What did you smell? Not much I could recognize, Toshiro replied honestly, sighing a bit as he tried to piece together the odd smell. I don't know Urza that well. Not enough to recognize her scent like the others. To me. Well, she had more in common with her scent with the dragons at the Grand Magic Games. We'll get answers soon enough, Laxus stated, making for the door. For now, let's just not keep our host waiting. I'd rather not give him an excuse to kill us all before this battle even begins. And there he goes, trying to put on a brave front for the rest of us, Levi muttered, watching as the others quickly fell into line behind Laxus and began to enter through the door. Well, not all of them. She didn't see Natsu. Where was he? Glancing back behind her, she saw Natsu staring at the house oddly. It was odd. It almost looked like he was in a trance. Natsu? You okay? Huh? Natsu's gaze snapped away from the house, turning towards her in confusion, as if only just remembering she had been there. Maybe he really just had realized. He hadn't said anything about that woman, and he of all people should have been able to recognize a smell similar to hers as if he was this close by. What had he been doing that had made him get so distracted? Had he been staring at this house the whole time? "Are you all right, Natsu?" she asked softly, noticing the way he seemed to keep glancing back at the house, confusion evident in his eyes. Something about this place was affecting him. But from the way he was acting, it didn't seem like he quite understand why. Natsu didn't answer her for a good few moments, his gaze locking back on the house solidly for that time. Even when he did speak, his gaze didn't shift from it. "Have you ever felt like you've seen something before? That you know it just by looking at it, and yet can't remember why? That's just déjà vu, Natsu. You probably have just seen some place similar." Natsu shook his head, bringing his gaze back away from the house towards her. "It's not. There's something about this place. I don't know it. I haven't ever been anywhere like this that I can remember. But it feels strange. I haven't been here, and yet this place doesn't feel alien to me. It feels... No. I'm imagining it. Feels like what, Natsu?" "It's fine," Natsu muttered. "Just a bit wary." "You aren't the only one," Levi replied with a smile. "Come on. Let's go catch up to the others. They're waiting for us." Natsu nodded, quickly picking up his pace as he followed after her. He was still unnaturally quiet as they walked, and even his breathing seemed to slow down as they stepped into the house. She managed to peek a glance behind her as she walked, following the natural path further into the home that had been made, and Natsu seemed even more confused than before. He was looking around, as if desperately trying to remember something. Halfway down the hall he even paused, crouching down briefly and running his hand across the wall. He smiled when he did that. She noticed. She wasn't sure if he was aware of it, but he was smiling so fondly. In that moment she had a good idea of why he had been confused outside. He looked so at peace here, almost exactly how he looked at Fairy Tale. "This place feels like home to you, doesn't it?" she asked quietly. They were near to the others and she'd rather not have people asking questions about why Natsu was acting like this. It would worry them at best, and at worst give the enemy something to use. "I don't know," Natsu said, having to pause for a few moments as he forced his smile to drop. "I swear to you, I don't recognize anything here. But I've been here. Or somewhere like here. I don't know. But it feels so familiar. I feel happy. And sad. And I don't know why. Emotions rarely do make sense." They both froze at the voice, turning towards the source as Ziraf appeared from behind the doorway they were heading towards. It can be so easy to feel conflicting feelings about the same place. "I myself hate this place. It's nothing but a replica, but I hate it. But I felt like it was worth putting up with it to make you feel a bit more comfortable, Natsu." Natsu didn't say anything. That wasn't like him, Levi noted. He was too quiet, listening to every word Ziraf said with cautious and curiosity. "Well, I can see that it partly succeeded," Ziraf stated, gesturing further into the room behind him with one hand. "If you would. I would not like to spend any time longer than necessary in this place, even if we still have some time to spare. We should get down to the reason you are all here, and for that I would appreciate you all being here. I would have invited Irene in with us, but her work requires her utmost attention. And she doesn't know you're Ziraf and you don't want us to give anything away." Ziraf merely nodded his head at that, an amused smile across his face. "You could also say that. And I trust none of you were foolish enough to say anything either, else I'm not sure I'd be able to restrain myself. I won't kill you, I need you. But those that aren't here are so much more expendable. Don't you dare," Natsu hissed out, flames involuntarily lighting up around his body. "You lay even a scratch on their heads." "I won't," Ziraf stated seriously. "Provided you don't give me cause to. Now, join us. Acknowledge it can only be delayed so long before the matter forces our hands, and we must strike before that happens if we are to have any hope of surviving." As the two reluctantly followed after the dark mage, they found the room already set up ready for them. A large table had been placed right down in the center of the room, most of its surface covered in maps and parchment, writing in languages that even Levi could only recognize half of. From the little she could read though as she approached the table, passing a few pieces of readable plans, Actual made her pause briefly to try and take some of the details in. Theories and plans. That was what this table seemed to be covered in. From some of the most well-developed streams of thoughts she had seen in some time to entire strategies she wanted to pick up and spend some time reading in depth. She didn't want to admit it, but a lot of these were incredible. Though perhaps that was to be expected. Hadn't Ziraf played a role in crafting some of pretty dangerous constructs? His demons aside, the Tower of Heaven had apparently been built from his own theories and designs, all for the purpose of being able to resurrect the dead. And while it had never been used without something stopping it, the theory itself behind it had never been disapproved even to this day. If you are all ready to begin. Ziraf's voice snapped her out of her thoughts, her head shooting back up to see the annoyed look he had as he stared at her. Good, you're paying attention. She wasn't going to apologize. If he expected one, he'd be waiting a long while. Besides, if he didn't want her getting distracted like this, then he shouldn't have placed all those papers out. She wondered how many she could try and read from here without it looking suspicious. I'm glad you all decided to come here, Ziraf said, looking around at them all. She followed his gaze for a moment as his eyes drifted from Dragon Slayer to Dragon Slayer, watching him carefully for any signs of trouble. It's what made her frown slightly when his eyes lingered on Natsu, and it's what made her scowl when he seemed to want to laugh at the sight of Laxus or want to say something cruel to Sting near the end of the table. I assume most of you know one another? Ziraf asked, gesturing at the mages from Fairy Tail and the one from Sabretooth. Sting has luckily dash. I wouldn't call it luck, Sting grumbled. Had the chance to meet one of my most loyal mages already. But for those who have yet to meet him, this is God Serena. So these are the ones to support me, God Serena said, looking at each in turn. They will do. I expected better looking supports though, he added as he pointed towards Gajeel. He's quite scruffy. Can't we have him cleaned up before the fight begins? Gajeel seemed to have to struggle to not say anything, taking a few deep breaths. One more word, he muttered under his breath. One more word and I'll punch his teeth in. Don't, Wendy hissed back nervously. He's dangerous. I'm glad one of you at least knows manners, God Serena stated, tapping his ears to give away that he had heard everything. Hopefully the battle you saw against the gods hasn't made you afraid, little girl. I won't allow us to be outdone by god slayers of all people. You know this creep, Wendy? Natsu asked in confusion. Ah, good, Levi thought, happy somewhat that Natsu could focus on something other than his own unusual confusion in this house. Though considering Wendy already knew this guy was a bit worrying. She really hated how much she had missed from being in that coma. Well. We met, Wendy admitted reluctantly. He came to ask us to join this plan around a few days ago. And here you all are now, God Serena stated happily. Absolutely wonderful. Ziraf. He paused at the glare he could feel being shot at him. Emperor Spriggan then. You are really picky today. Normally you let me get away with it. Normally you haven't been pushing my patience for multiple hours. Your presence is one I can stand, not desire. My boss can be quite cruel, God Serena said. He focused back on the others. As I was saying, Emperor Spriggan called us all here for some simple reason, one I have desired to fulfill for so many years now. We have only one goal from this alliance, and one goal only. To kill Acknowledge. Our plan is simple, God Serena continued, ignoring the questions some of them tried to ask as he pushed straight ahead with a well-rehearsed speech. In this room, 7 of us hold the key. We are Dragon Slayers. One of a flame that brings about the end of all things. One of iron that weathers the harsh storms. One of the sky that freely dances along the wind. One of light that plunges itself into darkness. One of ice, so cold it resembles the dead. One of lightning, with a current so strong it invades its own host. And one of all, that wields the source they all began from. Together, with the 7 of us, we hold the very power necessary to strike down the beast of calamity. Such a task will be hard, God Serena said, pushing on even as more people tried to interrupt him. Some of us may fall. Acknowledge is not a normal dragon. Acknowledge isn't even a unique dragon. He's a being that appears one in an eternity, a singular force that overwhelms all others. But at his core, he is a dragon. And there are no better ones to take on such a challenge but us. And we shall be victorious. We shall dash. God Serena continued to speak, but to the surprise of many no sound followed, even as he mouthed the words one after the other. Letting out a frustrated growl, Ziraf rubbed the side of his head as if trying to deal with an annoying headache. I forget how much of a pain that man is. I assume that's your doing then? Laxus asked, glancing at God Serena as the man continued on whatever line of thoughts he was on. How hasn't he noticed too? He's noticed, Ziraf spat out. He just doesn't care enough to do anything about it. That man loves the sound of his own voice far too much. You only had to put up with him for a few minutes. This attitude isn't a new thing for me. Just let him continue to talk. We will deal with the actual matters. He doesn't need to know. Sting asked. Just saying, but he seems pretty valuable in whatever plans we make, just going by magical power alone. Oh, he is. But he knows all these plans already. And even then there isn't any guarantee he'll listen to them properly. Serena does what he wants in the constraints of what he's told to do. If I tell him he has to fight against Acnologia and give him some guidelines and rules, he'll bear them in mind just enough to follow the majority and will ignore the rest of whatever plan I gave him if he deems it not flattering enough for his abilities. Even being serious won't change that by much. Now then, down to actual business, Ziraf stated, gesturing to the map in front of them all. We will be fighting. Let's see. How about here? He lazily raised a hand and gestured to a random point near the coast. Yes, that could work well. Out of the way enough for this to work. You're seriously going to randomly pick? Taoshiro asked. Is that your plan? It matters little where we go, Ziraf replied lazily before pointing at a place slightly north of the previous location. Though we should aim for here. This is where Irene has been preparing the foundation of her magic, Universe 1. Universe 1. Levi frowned at the name. It wasn't any kind of magic she had heard of before, and a name like that would have normally caught the attention of people. What's it do? Well, to put it simply for those here unable to grasp how to manipulate the building blocks of the world, it rearranges. It restructures. With it dash. You can reshape the world however you like, Wendy muttered, shocking Ziraf into silence at the fact another had finished the explanation for him. If you control the building blocks that make up matter, you can move them. You can rearrange them. A mountain could become a flat stretch of land, going on for miles, while what might have been a city can be remade into a fortress, with each and every piece of brick that made up the houses being formed into towering walls. Someone's knowledgeable about such matters it seems, Ziraf muttered, his eyes glancing up above Wendy for a moment and focusing on the invisible presence holding onto her shoulders protectively. You are truly going to be a scary girl in a few years if you have already managed to gain a proper understanding of what amounts to the foundation of that thing's magic. I wonder if I should just snap your neck now to remove the threat. Ziraf had barely finished those words when an iron sword had extended out and rested by his throat. There was no room to move back if he desired, Laxus's large form blocking his path with his dragonified arm on full display with lightning crackling around it. One edge of the table was completely missing, large burn marks across the edges of the missing sections, as the flames shot past Ziraf and slammed into the back wall and smashed straight through it. A sword was drawn as Taoshiro took a position in front of Wendy while solid light was being held tightly in Sting's hand, merely a throw away from impacting straight against Ziraf. Now I feel like this is an overreaction, Ziraf pointed out, not even showing the slightest bit of fear at the threatening stances being taken towards him. I was merely speaking out loud. If you dare harm a member of my guild, Laxus growled out threateningly. I'll dash. Do what? Kill me. Ziraf let out a laugh at the mere thought. Do your best if you want to try. I can guarantee you'll fail. Come on everyone, let's calm down, Levi said as she tried to wave them all down from doing anything rash. Let's just take some deep breaths here. He needs us so he won't kill us. Besides, don't we have a dragon to worry about? The girl is right, Ziraf said in agreement. Listen to your friend, why don't you? Very reluctantly, each of the dragon slayers slowly forced themselves to back away, returning to their original positions. Toshiro didn't sheath his sword however, nor did Laxus hide his arm away back under his cloak. The warning was clean. They weren't even pretending to trust Ziraf now, and if he tried anything they'd make their move. Now before we continue where we left off, spoke Ziraf, his eyes glancing towards Levi. Would you mind disabling the traps you just laid around this room? What traps? Really? You're going for that old trick? The moment you didn't make a move on me like the rest I knew what you did. You didn't keep your cool. You just ensured your reaction was a bit more well hidden. Not that I don't approve, it's the kind of tactics I prefer, but it's a pain to deal with on the other end. Disable them. Scowling, Levi reluctantly let 10 words float him from their position beneath the table and disappear. The rest. Another 20 joined the first 10. Really? You aren't even going to disable the lethal ones behind Wendy over there. Wendy's face went white as she squeaked out, lethal. Oh yes. Rather smart. Diversions at the front with the actual danger behind you. Like she expected me to break through her friends and go right for you in your blind spot. Either someone's too paranoid for their own good or simply is too similar to myself and would have done the same herself if she could. Scowling more, Levi allowed the last of the words to float up to show she was disarming them before letting the last of them disappear. That's better. Now we can all talk peacefully. Where was I? He nodded in agreement with himself as he remembered. That's it. Universe 1. I was going to explain its purpose before I was quite rudely interrupted. As you now know, it's a magic that rearranges. It restructures the world and lets us change up the place we will be fighting in. And this means ensuring Acknowledge is fought far away from our own people. That position is already quite far from the armies, Toshiro pointed out, glancing at the burnt half of a map resting near Natsu. Aren't we far enough away? How far have you been thrown in a fight before? I don't know. I don't really keep track. Well, just imagine being thrown and then multiple that by about 100 or so might do it. Acknowledge is powerful. Both physically and magically. If he focuses heavily on the latter and you aren't careful, he might end up scattering you all and shifting the battle away from where we want to be. And if he gets too close to our allies, a single roar from him will kill hundreds of thousands. Very little can survive one of his strongest attacks. And that's what Universe 1 is for, I assume? Asked Sting. To ensure that there is a greater distance to give us a larger battlefield to use and to avoid running into our allies. Correct. I know how much you value your friends and fellow guild members, and I do not want to find replacements for my army. So we must first ensure that they are kept separate. But Universe 1 will also serve to ensure none of you feel any needs to hold back. The battlefield will become an isolated war zone, where you can use all of your power without restraint. Now, to your roles, Ziraf added as he pressed on with his plan. Once the fight begins, all of you will have important roles to place. Serena here, despite his overconfidence, is one of our aces in this battle. He wields 8 different forms of Dragon Slayer magic, and when he uses them all together they resonate with one another to bring his power to heights unmatched by any raw Dragon Slayer. And like me, he has magic as his ally. He has no need to worry about running out of magic, so he'll be throwing around the strongest attacks he can to push Acknowledge onto the defensive. That, however, is not enough alone, continued Ziraf. Raw power? Unstoppable strength. Such things have been crushed by Acknowledge in the past. He faced down dragons that would have been described as monstrously strong by their own kind and won. One-on-one, God Serena's power would only fail him. Which is why the rest of you are necessary. He let a smirk appear as he raised a hand, pointing a finger towards Wendy. So let's start with you. Me? Wendy asked nervously. I assume my role's to heal, right? Oh, it certainly is. Supporting your allies, buffing their abilities, healing their wounds, it is not far off to say this fight would be lost without a support of your capabilities. But do you really think you would only be offering minor assistance? You are one of the few here capable of restoring their strength quickly. Combined with your Dragon Force's ability to give you freedom of movement in the skies, you potentially have the speed to make Acknowledge work to grab you. When needed, you must heal. But you also must go for the kill whenever it presents itself. But of course we can't afford to lose her, can we? Zeref said to the rest of them before turning his gaze on Gajeel. That is your role. Your greatest attribute is in your defense. Utilize it in that dual element mode of yours. Protect her with your life, because it might as well be forfeit without her. If she's going to take a blow, be there to push her out of the way. If a claw is about to tear off her arm, you better hope your iron can save your own as you take her place. Do you understand? I'd do that anyway even without you ordering, Gajeel growled out. Protecting our friends is an obvious thing for us. Well, let's see if you can maintain those thoughts when you actual face acknowledge, shall we? I've seen the most loyal of friends leave each other behind in the face of overwhelming danger, prioritizing their own safety above everything else. Turning again, Zeref focused on Laxus and Sting. Now, while we have our healer protected and our ace attacking, you two need to utilize your speeds to keep this pace going. Constantly circle acknowledge. Pressure him, ensure he can't move as he wants. Attack whenever you have a chance and even draw his attention long enough for Serena to sneak in another hit. And never stop moving if you can help it. With your impressive levels of power and speed, you'll be the perfect mages to keep damaging him and whittling him down as the fight drags on. I wish, Zeref added, turning towards Toshiro, that I could say the same about you. But while your magic is certainly strong, as a dragon slayer they two of them surpass your abilities in dealing damage. Ice has never been one to help, though your sword may still do work. At this stage I cannot yet tell if it will be able to piece acknowledge's scales. There has never been a dragon slayer with a Zanpakuto before now. Obviously you have something in mind, Toshiro muttered in annoyance. I already can guess though. Suppression. Your ice may not have as much of a kick to it as Laxus's lightning and Sting's own power in his dual element mode, but your ice is certainly powerful in its properties. Freeze the beast. It won't stop him, it won't kill him, but every second it slows him down matters. And it will hurt him given enough time. Death by 1,000 cuts is still death. When necessary I'll expect you to alter the flow of the battle. If Acknowledge is getting the upper hand, fill the area with ice and ensure everyone can regroup to fight as one again. Irene will also be joining you in this battle, Zeref added. I'm sure some of you already noticed part of her scent. She is not a dragon slayer. But she is a dragon. He frowned at the controlled responses he got at that. Odd. I thought I'd get more than that from you all. We won't give you the satisfaction, Gajeel growled out, ignoring the burning questions in his own mind. Can she fight? That's all I need to know. She's a dragon, Zeref simply stated. Of course she can. As a dragon slayer she would have been inferior to all of you, but as a dragon she is extremely dangerous like any old dragon would be. She's been around since their fall and remembers Acknowledge well. Just make sure you all target the right dragon in this fight. Your magic will be just as dangerous to her as it will be to Acknowledge, so remember if you decide to attack anyway. Now then, if that's all your questions dash. What about us? Natsu asked, gesturing between him and Levi. What's our role in all of this? Oh yes, Zeref muttered. I was forgetting something. Hold on one moment. With a snap of his fingers, darkness warped behind him and a hand of shadows stretched up from the empty space, a large bound book being held out towards him. Taking it carefully with one hand, Zeref placed it down on the table in front of him, turning it so that the words could be read clearly. This, Zeref said, watching as all their eyes got drawn to the name of the book, is my greatest demon. His name is End. I don't understand, muttered Natsu. What good is a demon here? I'm getting there, Zeref stated, beginning to fiddle with the seal binding the book shut. I assume some of you are already aware of how my demons work, but for those in the dark I shall explain. While most I can make manually and easily, my more developed demons are written in my books. And the most complex of my demons take up an entire book to contain their whole essence. End is no exception. Within this book holds his very being. But he's also a bit unique too. Unique how? Muttered Laxus, his voice revealing his unease. What's so special about E.N.D? Some of the only demons like him were those that formed my 9 demon gates and 4 demon kings. And all of those demons have their book fused into their bodies. They manifest around their books, and that signature is easy to track and use for recall when I need to recover them and revive them. But END works differently. His life, like all of them, is tied to his book. But he can also move independently. He has been moving independently of it rather. END is of course our secret trump card in this battle, Zeref continued. I can draw in almost unlimited amounts of magical power, and I can funnel so much of it towards END and let him use his overwhelming power to push Acknowledge back. Acknowledge fears END, you see, aware that his curse is one deadly enough to actually harm him in a large way. With the Dragon Slayers in him, Acknowledge will fall. That still doesn't answer my question, Natsu stated, his eyes never drifting from the book even as the others managed to. What is our role? Come now Natsu, I'm sure you already know. I don't. So tell me for God's sake. I don't need to. You knew the moment I placed this book down, didn't you? Lifting the cover of the book ever so slightly, he allowed part of the seal to just barely slip. Zeref. The others glanced at Natsu as his magic spiked up, flames unconsciously forming around his body and clinging to him like a second skin. Natsu himself barely seemed to notice, his eyes finally torn away from the book to stare at the man before him. Something seemed to light up in them for a moment, recognition that quickly fell to confusion. I know. I don't. His hands reached up to his head, gripping the sides of it tightly as he struggled with his own thoughts. No. Get out. These aren't. I'm not. Carefully pressing the cover of the book back down, Zeref allowed the seal to fall back into place. Only when it was secure did Zeref turn towards Levi. Your job will be to read this entire book and learn its contents, inside and out. We will need that for the battle ahead. I will be on standby beside you to offer assistance when necessary, but the rest will be up to the rest of you. Zeref. Natsu's voice drew Zeref's gaze back, the Dragon Slayer gripping the table tightly as the wood began to splinter beneath his hands. He didn't dare let go though, the table his one support to grip right now. Without it he was sure he wouldn't have been able to stand. My role? What is it? Even after that you don't know? You can be so foolish sometimes, Natsu. Or perhaps you just are trying to avoid the truth. Or maybe you are even blind to it. You were once like that after all. What do you mean? Another time perhaps, Zeref stated, resting his hand against the book once more. But for now, all you need to know is that you will be our final trump card. I'm sure the rest of you understand clearly too, but for your sake Natsu, I'll make it simpler so you can't ignore my words. All of my demons that utilize a full book to hold their essence are known as Aetherius demons. That is what the E stands for. No. You're lying. I'm not. I can't be. Not. Let's stop pretending, Zeref demanded, his patience obviously being drained. You can melt the ice made by your friend Grey, ice that is cursed to freeze magic and yet can be melted by your own flames for some reason. When you encountered Acknowledge and fought him, I felt your magic swell up for a brief moment when the Book of END got temporarily unsealed by Hades. You must have known that you couldn't have regained energy that quickly, and must have noticed the difference in your own recovery since then compared to your fellow mages. But if you still don't believe me, let's go back further, Zeref stated. Before Igneel, what do you remember? I don't know. Convenient, isn't it? Zeref asked, watching as the panic began to grow on Natsu's face in realization. You likely never even considered this, but you lack any memories before your time with Igneel. But you were with him for so long that and you could just ignore that. No one ever made you face this. But you can't run away from me. Before Igneel, there is nothing. No memory of parents, no memory of family, nothing. No even feelings. And yet when you arrived here, Zeref added, you felt like you had come home. Odd, isn't it? For you to think that about a hellhole like this, especially when you lived in a cave with that dragon before fairy tale. Don't you find that odd? Nothing to say? Zeref asked, noticing Natsu's silence. No, you're starting to accept it. Accept that fact that it's unnatural for there to be nothing before Igneel. Because there should be. And all of that is in here, Zeref added, placing his hand on the book once more. END has one simple meaning, and you knew it the moment you saw this book. Fairies. Natsu. Dragneel. My greatest demon, the one feared even by Acknowledge and spoken of with awe by my other creations, is you, my precious little brother. Protector of the fairies. The clash of the past and the present. It wasn't true. Whatever others had been trying to say to him, he didn't hear them. Whatever others tried to do to grab his attention, it didn't work. To the rest of the world, he might as well have been dead. END. Fairies Natsu Dragneel. That was what Zeref said the letters meant. What END stood for. It fit. Better than that, it felt right. It felt familiar. And he hated that. It wasn't true. The words had to be a lie. He had fled from the room at some point, time blending together in his hazy state, and even though others had followed, they had left after a while. It had felt like they had tried to grab his attention, but it had been too difficult to notice over the words from his own mind, screaming out in denial. He wasn't END. He wasn't a demon. He was Natsu. Just Natsu, really. That was the name Igneel had first called him. It was a present from him, and no one else. But, was that really true? He couldn't remember anything before Igneel. Not what led to him meeting that great dragon, not whatever event had left him all alone, nothing. But he did remember being called that name for the first time. It was a memory he held so dear, one of the first he had with Igneel. Had he been surprised when he was called Natsu back then? Surprised to be given a name? Happy to have received one? No. He wasn't sure he was. The memory was old, hard to remember clearly, but if he focused he was sure he was none of that. Maybe he was wrong, maybe it was his own mind messing with him here and making assumptions that weren't real, but it felt like being called Natsu had felt right back then. Like it was natural he should be called that. And that could only happen if he had been called Natsu before then, named by someone else. Dragneel too was an odd name. He thought Igneel gave it to him, but what if that had always been his name? Was it not a present from Igneel like he always thought? Or a name he was meant to take, regardless of Igneel's will? What about his magic? Or Igneel's scarf? Were these truly gifts from his father? Or merely things he was meant to receive? Lies. But which were the lies? His time with Igneel felt so warm and happy, but then there were these other emotions. Emotions that had only grown stronger after Zeref had opened that book. E.N.Ds book. He shook his head desperately before pressing his hands against his ears, trying to block out the traitorous thoughts. He was not a demon. He couldn't be. But the power he felt. No, he was a dragon slayer. A dragon slayer that had managed to suddenly make Acknowledge very angry without understanding how, despite having been nothing but a minor nuisance moments before. Who was END anyway? The strongest demon? He would have laughed if not for the confusion this whole situation was throwing him into. There was no way a child could have been the strongest demon. What curse did the demon even have to be such a threat that even Acknowledge would be afraid? His eyes widened as memories flooded back. Hadn't he managed to burn Acknowledge at one point? In a last-ditch effort to save Laxus? Acknowledge had kept talking about how he was being supplied with magical power, how he was getting outside help. And his own attack to strike him, it had felt so much stronger than he should have been capable of unleashing back then. This wasn't the first time either that his magic had done stuff like this. He had burnt Gray's ice away when he shouldn't have been able to. He had melted bars of pure energy against Quilge, and he was sure flames couldn't do that to magic. And then there were the words. You really do live up to your name, END. E.N.D. Quilge's last words, barely heard over the flames. Acknowledge's own roar, screaming out that single name with raw fury. Why hadn't he realized? Why hadn't he made the connection? He knew why. It was the same reason he was in denial now. The answer was simple. He didn't want to be END. He wasn't one of Zeref's demons. He was Natsu of Fairy Tail, and that was all he had wanted to be. He would have been happy being just that. Searching after a dragon that might never be found, having fun with his friends on countless adventures, that was the life he had. And he wouldn't have traded it for anything. Which was why he couldn't be END. If he was, could he even go back to those times? So he had ignored it. Passed it off as best as he could. Acknowledge's roar had been passed off as the dragon screaming for his end. The name Quilge muttered had been purposefully forgotten. Every little thing that began to make his old life crack had been pushed to one side. Until now. He couldn't stop it, even as he squeezed his eyes shut and tried to drown out the world. Every little bit of denial, every burning question he had avoided answering, it all fell out at once. At least he finally understood though why he hadn't been able to pass through that age barrier that Fried made. He had definitely been above the age limit. Hang on. Hadn't Gajeel been affected by that too? What did that mean for him? Was Gajeel a demon too? No. No, he didn't think he was. Ziref would have brought it up otherwise, just like he had done with END. Whatever had affected Gajeel, it wasn't entirely the same. And then there was Wendy. She had smelled familiar the first time he met her. He had even felt like he should have recognized her, but couldn't. Was this also related? Was this part of END too? There were too many questions, all rolling around in his mind. He felt like he was drowning in them, struggling to hold on to any sense of normality in the belief of who he was. He was Natsu. Human, not demon. But as he opened his eyes and looked around the room he was in, he found himself frowning. He had no memories of this place, but it still felt familiar all the same. He was Natsu of Fairy Tale. But the more he tried to resist, the more his mind began to whisper other thoughts into his mind. He was Natsu of Fairy Tale. But maybe he was also the boy who had lived here once. Protector of the Fairies. Caracol Island. It was meant to be a tourist destination from what he had been told once. He had heard of it a few times in passing in the guild, though none seemed interested to actual visit. But from the tales he heard at least he knew what he should have expected. At least during peacetime. The moment war started, an island like this would have been invaded by Alvarez in a heartbeat. It would serve as a springboard to attack from until they could ensure their foothold on land was secured. There wouldn't be crowds of civilians here, trying to have a good time and relax, but instead dozens of armed soldiers, ready to cut down any enemy that even came within sight of the island. That wasn't what any of them found on this island, however. There were people here, but not one of them had a scrap of life in them, their bodies nothing but dolls as they moved and struck out at them. It was revival of the foulest kind. The presence of magical barrier particles only strengthened the belief in what they already knew. When these soldiers had died was uncertain, but there was no doubt who had killed them, and then brought them back to serve him. Such foul tactics, Warad muttered angrily, coming to a stop beside Ichigo as they both glanced at the few soldiers still left. These people did not deserve this. Ichigo nodded in agreement, carefully keeping an eye out for any other traps like the others. What did Avatar hope to accomplish with this? Did they want to delay us? This won't slow us down. That isn't the point, I'm afraid, Hibarian stated, crouched down by the blood of one of the fallen soldiers and running his hand across it. As he pulled his fingers back up from the pool, the blood came with him, shifting and condensing down until it formed a small sphere in the palm of his hand. Without hesitating he brought the orb up to his mouth and swallowed it in one go, his eyes widening briefly in shock at something before he swore. Baragan was definitely brought through here. You're sure? Hibarian nodded, rubbing his temple in frustration. Blood doesn't lie. These people died on their way through. It seems we actually have to thank Ziref for his barrier for once. In their attempts to avoid detection by punching a hole through it, they've been forced to take a slower route than they would have otherwise taken. All right, let's keep moving, Wywak stated, his words sounding more like orders as he walked a few steps up into the sky. My sight can't quite make out their moves, but the path ahead looks clear if we head to the west. We can head up north once we manage to get clear of this island, and after that it should be a smooth journey. Traveling that way might be tricky for some of us, Warad muttered. I'm not good at moving across the sea. Do you think your friend could help us out within the barrier too, Ichigo? I asked Nozomi to bring us this far and no further, Ichigo stated. She headed back once she dropped us off so she couldn't be caught in the crossfire of our fight. Besides, We aren't within the barrier yet. This was the closest she could get us in the first place. So the long route it is. Placing a hand under his chin, Warad glanced around carefully, looking for potential materials he could use before finally setting his eyes on the large amount of palm trees on the beach. "They'll do," he muttered. "I should be able to make a makeshift platform of sorts to ride along. Hi Brian, will you be alright? I'd appreciate the lift if you don't mind, though wouldn't it be better to acquire one of their ships? They have plenty left behind, and I have the rudimental knowledge on how to control it. I'm sure you can do better considering your many adventures." "It's been a while," Warad admitted, "but I can still remember a few things. Would anyone else like to join us?" "We'll move faster in the skies," Wywak stated, his gaze still on the horizon before he frowned. "A storm will hit us soon too in that direction. If those of us that can airwalk move quickly, we can beat it if we leave soon." "Not all of us can do that, in case you forget," replied Warad, forcing a sigh to escape the Quincy King's lips as he turned to face another direction. "If you head directly northwest from here, you can hit land before the storm hits. However, my vision darkens in areas. Something is interfering with it. The path may be watched. What's life without a bit of risk?" asked Aoesu, already walking towards one of the boats with a large tank strapped to his back, a sword floating within. "With the lot of us here, all their traps can do is slow us down." "Aoesu may be right," Ichibe mused. "After the trap left here, they might want to delay us by trying to make us take the long route. Alternatively, they may want us to think that and are waiting for us to charge straight in. Regardless, time is short. The straight path is the only choice left. Unless something has changed in the future." Wywak went silent for a moment, his gaze locked on something far away before he began to shake his head. "The darkness still approaches. We have 2 days left to act, and I fear we will only manage to arrive with hours to spare at best. Things get unclear the closer we get." "Then we have little time to waste then," Ichibe stated. "I will meet you all with Ichibe at the ship. If you have any business on this island, I'd do it quickly. Our journey is still incomplete and we cannot afford to pause here for long." With that, the monk was quickly walking towards the ships in the harbor, catching up with Aoesu in barely any time while Wywak slowly followed from the sky. "It's unusual power, isn't it?" Hibarian muttered, glancing after Wywak as the others left approached him. "Did you hear what he claimed it was?" "He said some kind of prophecy magic," Ichigo said quietly, one hand kept constantly on the dagger he carried, ready to fight an enemy at any time. "But I didn't really believe that." "Did you?" Hibarian shook his head. "Not at all. He's lying about something. And his vision and foresight tends to be too accurate to call what he sees mere prophecies. Prophecies tend to be more uncertain, and yet he speaks in absolutes. Like he believes he cannot be wrong in any situation about what he sees." "So we're in agreement then," Warad added himself. "It's more dangerous than typical foresight. Though it seems he does speak the truth when he claims he can't see past magical barrier particles. They've obscured his vision. That's good for us." Hibarian glanced warily at Wywak in the distance before lowering his voice even more. "Can you get me his blood?" "His blood?" asked Ichigo uncertainly, making sure to keep his voice low like the others. "I assume this is because of your magic." Hibarian nodded. "I don't publicize it much, but many can quickly pick up that my magic relates to the manipulation of blood. Its manipulation is the tip of the iceberg with it though. So much is contained within our blood. It strengthens me, gives me sustenance, and even lets me look into another's soul. If I can get a direct connection to Wywak that way, I could make an opening for the rest of you to strike." "It might work," Warad admitted. "But it's risky. He won't be aware of anything if we are careful until Avatar is stopped, but the second his vision becomes clear again he might learn the truth. I think we need a more absolute method to stop him." "There is another option," Hibarian offered up reluctantly. "But it involves far greater risk. The previous method merely requires me to get his blood at some point, which could be easy enough in the battle, even if we have to interfere a bit and make it look like an accident. The other option is to get my blood inside him. If he was to be distracted during the fight." "You'll never manage it in the midst of battle," Ichigo said, shooting down the idea immediately. Though. We brought a bit of food with us, right? A bit, Warod replied, catching on quickly. I have a few pieces of fruit myself. Magic can sustain me for the most part, but I wanted something tasty before going into a battle I might die in. I was the same, Hyborian stated. I have a bottle of wine, he said, hesitating at the last word. I wanted a few glasses as we approached to help steel my nerves. I'm sure everyone else has their own guilty pleasures before this battle. I wouldn't be surprised if Aoesu started forging a sword. Perhaps. Could we get Waiwak to eat or drink something? Ichigo asked. If he sees the future so clearly, we just need to make sure nothing happens as a result until the fight ends. It's the one point where everything will be completely concealed from him. He's unlikely to accept easily, muttered Warod. But maybe. It's worth a shot, I suppose. He can't prove anything is being done. But if he really gets suspicious, infect the rest of us too. You're sure? Hyborian asked. Not many would be willing to accept such a risk. We have to ensure this works, Warod stated calmly. I'll take the risk if it means any magic he does pick up on appears to be harmless if we are all ingesting it too. So we'll in agreement then. Hyborian let out a sigh as the other two nodded at him. What a situation I've ended up in. Just make sure to not give anything away no matter what. Now let's hurry up and catch up with the others. Best to not give him any other reasons to start suspecting us yet, if he hasn't already. We need him blind to your intentions for this to work, else I'd hate to face him once this battle ends. Our alliance only holds until that point after all. Protector of the Fairies. How long had he stayed like this? People came and vanished before his eyes, sometimes before he had time to recognize them. Or maybe they did stay long enough and he just couldn't focus on them for long enough to tell. He couldn't tell, too focused on his own thoughts. Until that man appeared. Honestly, not even responding to your own friends. That's not very fairy tale-like, is it, Natsu? His eyes glanced towards the voice, easily recognizable from the two conflicting things it made him feel. Ziref. Ziref's eyes widened briefly in surprise before an amused smirk crossed his lips. So he speaks. Well? Did you have fun in Dreamland? Natsu wanted to shot back some retort, but it was only just hitting him on how dark it had gotten in here. One of the few lights left in the room came from the candle Ziref held. Why a candle? He wanted to ask that, but he felt like he already knew the answer. Because this felt familiar. Ziref had no reason to use a candle like this, to hold it in that pose, unless he was doing this on purpose to make him remember something. And he hated that it was working. So he focused on something else instead, hoping it would pull his attention away from the traitorous thoughts in his mind. How long have I been like this? Oh, only a few hours. You don't need to worry too much. You friends did that for you, Ziref replied, the amusement showed on his face not matching up with the concerned tone he tried to take. I assume you have been thinking a lot on the previous matter? About your existence, I suppose. I'm not E.N.D. Well, I suppose that is true currently, Ziref stated, taking a few steps forward before taking a seat beside Natsu and placing the candle between them. Natsu wanted nothing more than to push the dark mage away, to get as far away as he could and press his back against the wall so he had him in his sights at all times. But he didn't move an inch. If Ziref noticed the internal conflict, he didn't say anything, instead continuing to talk. Right now you can probably honestly call yourself a member of Fairy Tail, and only that, even as parts of END seep through the cracks of the seal. You wouldn't be feeling any of it honestly if it hadn't been touched a few too many times. The seal was always delicate, and was never meant to act as a blocker. With people opening the book, and you yourself forcing it to lift from your desire for power to win, it's only natural it has some holes in it. If I had known it would be used like this, I would have made it far more flexible rather than a stopgap until I needed END completely. Are you worried? Ziref asked, noticing how silent Natsu had gotten. You shouldn't be. When END is fully unleashed, the process will be painless. You won't disappear, but you will be changed. The you of the past and the you of the present cannot exist at the same time without something giving way, and I am curious of what outcome will occur. It's all game to you, isn't it? Ziref frowned at Natsu's cold words, glancing towards his brother uncertainly. Natsu. And me. Whichever remains doesn't matter to you, does it? Just so long as you win against Acknowledge. Well, I can hardly say I'd be disappointed, Ziref replied calmly. The end result is still the closest thing to the original you as I'll get for now. It's the best I'll get until I ensure this world is destroyed, and if need be I can wait even longer for that. For now I'll be more than satisfied with seeing the kind of person you will be like this. If you're good, I might even consider delaying all my plans for another few decades. What? Surprised? Ziref smirked. I can be kind to those that I care for. Depending on how the events with Acknowledge go, I could easily decide to leave you all for the next 100 years and put my plans into action then. That should give you time to live a happy life before you die and your soul is returned to the book. Perhaps you could even get married and have a family. I wonder if you'd invite me when you marry that white-haired friend of yours. I'd love to meet her. I wonder how she'd react at a surprise summons to Alvarez. Ziref began to laugh at the image before he suddenly felt his back being slammed down against the ground, Natsu pinning him from above with one hand held tightly down against his throat. Was it something I said? If so, Ziref's words were cut off as Natsu began to squeeze, flames flickering off his body and intensifying around the hand tried to crush Ziref's throat. Don't. You. Dare. Natsu snarled. You even come close to Lysina. You even think about coming within 10 miles of her, and I'll kill you. I'll burn you alive if I need to, until not even a single trace of you is left. Ha, ha. You're laughing. Natsu tightened his grip as his fury rose, the flames around him picking him. You think this a joke? Well. Not at all, Ziref managed to say as he squeezed the words out. Just finding it funny. How cruel and demon-like you are, right now. And Natsu froze, his grip slowly loosening as the flames died down. Before his mind could be changed, he shot backwards and pressed himself against the nearest wall, holding one hand against his head as he struggled to get himself under control. Rage is quite an interesting thing, Ziref croaked out, rubbing his throat as all signs of damage vanished and his voice returned to normal. It can quite easily bring out the true nature of someone. It's how I found out what I had to do, and it seems to be revealing to you a part of you that you have yet to embrace. But for how long will that remain, I wonder? Stay away from me, Natsu ordered, warily watching as Ziref got to his feet and took a few steps forward. Or I'll dash. Kill me? Oh Natsu, it's really quite amusing how you think you could do that. I forgot the feeling of having a little brother, having them always claiming to be able to do such impossible things. Though I guess some things remain constant. You're worried about me even now that I'm your enemy. But it's hardly necessary. I won't die. I'm not worried, Natsu snarled out, pressing his back closer against the wall as Ziref took another step closer. But if you dare threaten my friends like that, dash. I was merely having some fun, Ziref stated, continuing to approach slowly. I never got to tease you about your love life when you were a kid. I'm actually enjoying this right now. So many things I never had the chance to try before. I thought I told you to stay back. Natsu swung out with his fist as Ziref stepped too close for comfort, striking the man against the side of his hand and forcing his gaze away. In the time he gained, he quickly tried to make some more distance between them before tripping in his haste, rolling across the floor and coming to a halt on the hard ground. By the time he was getting to his feet, Ziref was right in front of him. Immediately he was prepared for retaliation, flames lighting up across his body as a makeshift defense, before all those fears vanished from a single action. Are you all right, Natsu? Ziref asked, his hand resting on Natsu's head. There was a soft smile across the man's face, one he had never seen before. He wondered if anyone had. It looked so calm and peaceful, so full of love. And then he realized. Someone had seen this smile before. Because he remembered the happiness he must have once felt when it was aimed towards him. Natsu. And suddenly the smile was gone, being replaced by an annoyed scowl as Ziref turned towards the door. Laxus was halfway in the doorway, his dragonified arm crushing the wood as he prepared to take a step through the door. What's going on here? Just having a little brotherly chat, Ziraf stated, annoyed at the interruption. This is a private conversation, so if you would mind leaving. He sighed when the man made no attempts to move. Very well, have it your way. I'm still in a good mood, so I'll let you have this little victory here. Turning back to Natsu, he tried to put on the same smile as before but found it difficult with the glare behind him breaking his focus every few seconds. Do you like this place, Natsu? He asked as he began to stand. It's actually a replica of our old home. It's warm, Natsu muttered honestly. Like the guild. Really? I hate it, Ziraf stated, disgust on his face as he glanced around the room. Every inch of it makes me wish to blow it off the map, to remove every last trace of it and to ensure what remains cannot be spread in any way. Even though this place is a mere replica, it still feels like hell to me. Then why make it? Because you liked it, Ziraf replied simply, still glancing around at the room. I doubt you cared much for the other occupants. But you were always smiling when I was around in this house. If things had gone differently, we would have left here together one day. But those days are long gone now. Even if I could, I wouldn't go back. I'm sure the same tragedy would occur again if I did. Ignoring Laxus at the door, Ziraf moved to one of the walls instead and let a wave of darkness slam against it, opening up a large hole for him to step through while making him smile at the act in the process. I hope this place at least helps you rest a bit more easily until the battle, Ziraf stated. Older brothers are always willing to make a few personal sacrifices for their younger siblings. This is my sacrifice. For as long as you remain as your current self, I hope you can fill that time with some brief happiness and peace, even if it confuses you. Because soon you won't have that chance as you are. Not ever again. Protector of the Fairies. Are you still fine, Gramps? Arlok nodded his head, glad his mask hid the sweat showing his own exhaustion. Despite his weakening body, he continued to pray before his staff, even as countless others had fallen and had their staves scattered before them. He had known this would be difficult. But knowing that and being prepared for it were two very different things. He could pray at a relic of their god for days without moving, but doing the same while wielding so many magical barrier particles and trying to keep them under control was taking everything he had. He could barely stay away, and the multiple self-inflicted wounds across his body were all that helped snap him out of his dreariness. Only a few of them still remained to carry out the ritual as it stood. 3 out of the 4 copies of Briar were lying unconscious at the feet of the 4th, while Jerome was struggling to stand currently and using his own sword for support, his other hand holding up 3 staves high that he had claimed from the falling disciples. He wished some of the others could have kept up as long as he had, but some had fallen hours ago, the small form of Abel unable to handle the strain for nearly as long as any of them. Even so, his ability held strong, and some of the current standing disciples only managed to remain in such positions thanks to his power holding them in place. Beyond them, D6 and Guman still remained standing. He wondered if others like BG9 might have been able to repeat the feat, or how Laxus and Levi might have done. But it was pointless dwelling on such matters now. They had to keep moving forward. Glancing at his granddaughter, he could see she was reaching her limit too. Her faith had always helped her hold out for the longest, but it seemed even that had its limits now. Not that he could blame her for that. What they were doing was the toughest challenge of their lives. Reviving a soul was easy to do with magic. With his power purified by magical barrier particles, it was harder. The cursed magic would fight at every step, and for each step forward it felt like another 3 were taken back. It was even worse when it realized what soul you were looking for, and then it fought to hold it back out of spite. But this wasn't the same. This soul was a dangerous one to magic. It wasn't fighting to keep it out of spite against them, but out of realization of what they were after. It could easily give up a random soul if needed. But Nukin's soul? And the soul of one who had hated everything at his end? It couldn't give it up. And so it resisted. But it was weakening. For hours and hours this ritual had continued, moving into the next day and the next. Where countless would have given up, they pushed forward. For with each passing second, their victory got closer. The body was already prepared. The corpse of Baragan had been filled to the brim with magical barrier particles. They didn't have the pure gifts to give that Laxus and Levi had, but they had found the next best thing. Ancient and untouched lacrimas, built up over countless years for this eventual day. Not one had been spared, and now they all found themselves inserted into Baragan's corpse, ready to fuel him with all the energy he might need. Few could handle it, but he had been Anukin. If he couldn't, none could. All they needed now was the soul. They were so close. But also so far. He saw D6 near the edge of his vision, and immediately the strain picked up higher, Guman almost falling himself before managing to keep himself conscious at the last moment. Some of the other disciples weren't so lucky, and it left them only 5 left to pray. Magic was pushing back even harder now. It sensed the weakness. It felt like it could win, and its grip was tightening as it tried to pull the soul back. But they hadn't come this far to lose. This was their trial. The last before they would meet their God. They just had to overcome this last hurdle. Despite the pressure against them, they continued. And as they did so, the soul began to move closer and closer. The dark light of the seal above Baragan's body was glowing brighter and brighter as the soul was summoned forth, and as it passed through the circle he could practically feel the scream of the world in fury. The ground was shaking, and he quickly ensured the seal was shut off to prevent the soul from being ripped back through. Was the ground shaking out of anger against them? Or was this the laughter of Mimi Heiji, at the sight of them spitting in the face of the cruel god known as magic? He chose to believe it was the latter, and could only let out a sigh of relief as the soul began to lower into Baragan's body. Already life was beginning to be restored. He could see movement coming from the dead body as the soul began fully absorbed by it, and with the first breath of life the air was filled with magical barrier particles. Incredible! Arlok said, dropping his staff in shock as he fell to his knees from a mixture of the sight and his own exhaustion. He's already drawing the power. And I don't feel any of it escaping his grasp. Ukin sure are useful, Mary said as she leaned against him tiredly, yawning as she watched a cloud of magical barrier particles begin to wrap around Baragan's body. Hey, what do you think he's doing? Preparing for his ascension, I'm sure, Arlok replied confidently. He has guests coming too. I'm sure Ichigo Kurosaki will be arriving in due time. Baragan will be waiting. Kuro-saki. The low grumble of a voice echoed through the hall, coming from the darkness within the magical barrier particles. Kuro-saki. Kurosaki. Ichigo Kurosaki. Magical barrier particles sprung out in all directions, like spears that slammed against the walls. Arlok could only smile at the sight, even as one shot straight past his face and cut away a portion of his metal mask. Yes. That is right, Baragan. Ichigo Kurosaki is coming here. Your revenge is nigh. Kill. 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 Yes. Kill all you want. Arlok proclaimed as wave after wave of magical barrier particles slammed out and pushed him and Mary back. For Mimihagi's sake, go wild to your heart's content. Bring down magic's foolish guardians and cast this world into dash. MPS. Arlok froze at the broken words, glancing back towards his granddaughter before his eyes widened. She was holding her hands against her stomach, but that did nothing to hide the large hole going through it, the lingering energy of magical barrier particles still clinging to the wound. Mary. Sorry, Gramps, she muttered weakly as she fell to her knees, her strength failing her. I won't see Mimihagi's rise. Arlok froze for a moment, looking down at his granddaughter's body. No corpse, he forced himself to realize. She was gone now, killed by the stray shot of Baragan as he tested his body. Though wasn't the room a bit too quiet? Baragan had stopped with his roars of anger, but he didn't hear any cheers of their success. Turning back round, he found the reason why. All those that had been standing lay against the ground, bleeding wounds covering their bodies from the stray attacks sent their way. Had he been so blind at the sight of their success that he had missed this occurring? What was happening? Was this part of Mimihagi's will? He looked up as he felt a presence appear before him, the towering body of Baragan standing before him. It was morphing with every second though, the magical barrier particles changing him. He hardly remembered the man being 3 times his height and growing, nor the disjointed look that he seemed to have as he stared at him. Destroy! 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 Destroy. Ah. He understood now. They had played their roles. And so as a result, Mimi Heiji now had no longer any need of them. Instead they would be allowed to join him sooner than expected and become part of his power. If that was the will of his god, he would not resist. No, instead he stretched out his hands to his fate, awaiting the fatal blow before a hand sliced through him with a stream of magical barrier particles. Praise Mimi Heiji, he declared with a smile, even as he collapsed at the feet of the revived being before him. This was fine to him. Baragan would tear and kill and destroy. With his rate of growth with the magical barrier particles, it wouldn't be long until he changed. With this, Mimi Hagi's return was certain. The fall of magic into darkness would become absolute. Protector of the fairies. The shining city of darkness. Well, look at that, Ichibe muttered doubtfully. We actual did make it. And only a few minutes off at most. Were you counting? Ichibe nodded, ignoring the look the Quincy King gave him for the moment as he examined the city in the horizon. Had to be sure. I had my suspicions of course, but I only interacted with you a few times 400 years ago, and you weren't foolish enough to try and fight me in those early days. Too young and too smart to challenge beings you yet could finish off by yourself. Though I'll admit I still hadn't been certain of it until recently. History tells tales of you in a very different way. I am aware, Waiwak replied calmly, his voice even in not giving anything away to the other Ukin. Time has a way of distorting the truth. There aren't even any stories left of the celestial spirit king. Only mere myths written in stone walls, long since rendered almost unreadable from the passing of time. And there isn't even that left when it comes to your past. As it should be, Ichibe stated, each word transmitting the utmost certainty that he felt with that statement. Relics of the past like myself should be forgotten. Our time has passed. Our time. Those words aren't a mistake, Ichibe stated seriously, glancing away from Vistarian in the distance to stare blankly at the Quincy King. Our time has passed. Mine did thousands of years ago and yours did hundreds ago. Now that sounds like a threat, Waiwak replied coldly, the energy around him sparking to life in a practiced fashion and forming a blade familiar to him in his hands. Do you want to continue with this now? When we still have a more pressing threat before us? I say this now because that threat still exists, Ichibe shot back, pressing his hands together rather than reaching for the large brush he carried on his back. The lack of action from the monk slowly caused Waiwak to let his own weapon fade away, the specks of magic circling his hand warily still but staying in an incorporeal form. Good, you have enough sense to listen. It matters little what you plan to say. It will not change my actions or the path I will take. And yet I will try anyway. So please at least try and listen rather than filtering it out with that powerful eye of yours. You should stop this. How did I know you would say something so predictable? It should be predictable, Ichibe countered. Because it's the truth. You had your time 400 years ago. You lived, built an empire, and fell into slumber and had it fall apart. That is the end of your tale. That is how it should be. The only reason you linger is because magic allowed you to. As it did you. Except I don't try and interfere in the affairs of others any further. I played my role and then stepped to the side, as was expected of me. And yet I do not see you having this discussion with the other Ukin. You desire me to cease hostilities and give up my goal. I seek you to understand your role in the world, Ichibe shot back coldly. Many of us might as well be walking corpses. Others younger than you have already grasped the truth. Aoyasu offers aid reluctantly in extreme circumstances but otherwise isolates himself making blades. Warrod is nearing the point that he should step away and has even now begun limiting his activities towards dealing with matters that others can't yet handle. And Hiberion? Waiwak asked, a smirk on his face at the look he was given. What is his excuse? He is far more active than I'm sure you'd like him to be. He's still young, relatively speaking. And he's angry. But at least that anger isn't leading him towards a selfish pursuit of a goal only beneficial to himself. He at least acknowledges the importance of allowing the new generation to take over and lead the path forward. Forgive me if I withhold my support, Waiwak shot back. I have seen the actions many could cause, even before my sight returned, and I hold my doubts that they can achieve much. All I see are mistakes, mistakes that were made 400 years ago, 300 years ago, 200 years ago and 100 years ago. And you wish me to step back and let them continue like this? I can save them from themselves. Save them? I guess that is how you see the situation. Because nothing was ever wrong with the way your kingdom was ruled, I take it? I suppose it was random chance that you couldn't prevent it from falling. Waiwak paused for a moment, the energy around his hand spiking in intensity but otherwise keeping himself as unreadable as he could. You should be prepared for what comes after we win. I don't tell lies, and I take great satisfaction in telling you that the moment the chaos is dealt with I will remove your head from your shoulders. Such insolence, Ichibe muttered in disappointment. I had hoped you would have listened to reason, but I guess you are too far gone in your decision. I gave you a chance to stop. Act again and I will no longer play the role as bystander. Waiwak merely nodded, barely listening to the threat and instead responding with a question of his own. I assume you will be giving Ziraf the same warning. I already have. But this world contains many fools, some who are too gifted to halt. Oh, muttered Waiwak, interested for once as he turned back round. You can't stop him, can you? Ichibe remained silent for a moment, his face blank before he uttered, Is that what you believe? Yes, Waiwak replied, his voice filled with confidence. I see it now. Whatever abilities you possess, they aren't capable of defeating him, are they? Given time, Ziraf is capable of unraveling seals binding him, and for you must not possess the means to prevent him from doing that. Nor can you bypass his immortality either. I feel like I have a good grasp on what kind of powers you have now. Thank you for that. You should not pretend like you are not wary of him either. You cannot kill him. I know I cannot, Waiwak replied simply. But unlike you, I have confidence that I can beat him. I can master countless magic, learn countless spells, to the point sealing him away for a few millennia is hardly a challenge. And that is even if he decides to challenge me. Pretty soon, he may not even see the need to. Not when the very reason he has for fighting vanishes. But you are still wary all the same, Ichibe shot back. Is that not why you left Pernida to watch him from a distance? Ichibe let a smirk cross his face as Waiwaka's eye twitched slightly. Thought I wasn't aware of him, did you? He's hardly a new existence in this world. You were just lucky to find his current incarnation. There is danger there, Waiwak simply stated, ignoring Ichibe's remarks. You know as well as I the lengths magic can go and how it can act. His actions could easily be perceived as a betrayal, and a Nukin as dangerous as him armed with the worst kind of power for us to face is something I would seek to avoid. With Pernida watching, he can be neutralized before he can grow into the power if he does fell. Is that something you have seen? Not yet. But there is always the possibility after the enemy before us is vanquished. I believe in covering all my bases to achieve my victory. And while he may claim to be safe, that he is loved too much by magic for it to reject him for this, I do not trust his words. Nor do I trust he will remain quiet while all of us are gone. Acknowledge has his focus. You aren't a fool, Ichibe, Waiwak stated. Don't pretend to be one here. He may be going to fight Acknowledge, but his focus is hardly on it alone. We are an entire continent away. I wouldn't miss that chance, and neither would he. If he hasn't planned something, then I might as well be blind to the. Waiwak paused, glancing towards the city as his eye began to narrow. What is that? Protector of the fairies. What? What is this? Ichigo muttered, looking down the streets as the group slowly walked through Vistarion. The closer they had gotten to the Alvarez Empire's capital, the more unsettling everything had begun to appear. It had been Waiwaka's words that made them hurry up, having caught up to the king and the monk just as they were finishing talking, and he had hardly been prepared for the sight that they had witnessed as they sped down towards the city. At first, everything had seemed normal. It was quiet though. Unnaturally so, to the point they couldn't hear much from the wildlife near the borders. It wasn't until they got closer did they begin to notice the rotting plants and vegetation withering away and left as nothing more than dead husks. It only got worse as they drew nearer. Under normal circumstances, he was sure Vistarion would have been a lovely place to see. The bulk of the city rested on ground level while a large plateau stretched up in the center, giant walls reaching up before being dwarfed by even larger towers that stretched towards the sky, bridges running from one to another as means of travel between the giant structures. He could even imagine how the forest nearby looked normally, with lush green trees stretching out far and wide, meant to act as decoration and wonder for what was the country's pride and joy. The seat of their power would never be anything but marvelous to observe. But this wasn't nearly as incredibly as such a city should have been. Two of the giant towers had been broken off, one with the top half barely connected and leaning precariously over the edge of the walls. He was sure some of the top had already broken off and fallen down to the city below. In regards to the second tower, it didn't have nearly as much luck. Part of the giant wall had been torn down with it and he could see the remains scattered in a line from the edge of the plateau all the way to the edge of the city, houses and buildings crushed beneath solid stone. Whatever forests had once surrounded the once great capital were nothing but dead trees, revealing nothing but a field full of death. It made sense why they hadn't heard any animals nearby. Any that stayed would have been fools to remain. And then there was the noise. The silence continued even now, only disturbed by their own breathing and the steps they made across the ground. Not a single sound beyond their own could be heard. Even the wind was quiet, and not a single breeze reached them as they walked. It was only when they reached the outskirts of the city itself did the situation become truly worse. In all directions, from up in the sky to down on the ground, lingered magical barrier particles. Not even in small pockets too. They populated the city, like a disease that had taken root in Vistarian that had helped rob it of life. Entering further had been difficult. Magical barrier particles were poisonous. Breathing them in was a surefire way of damaging your lungs. In small amounts most could manage if they had a decent amount of magical power to combat it. But this wasn't what any of them could call a small amount. Magic could protect them, help them heal if necessary, but it didn't mean the process wasn't painful. They had been forced to push forward regardless though. They didn't have the luxury of retreating. But it didn't make the reality they faced worse. He had thought it had reached as bad as it could get. That was until he stepped on something. Pulling his foot back, he couldn't stop himself from stumbling back at the sight, the crushed remains of what looked like bones, blackened from their usual white from the energy that still lingered around them. As he looked around more, he quickly began to realize just how terrible the situation in the city had truly gotten. The city should have held hundreds of thousands of people at a minimum. It was large enough for that. But not once had they seen a single soul. They should have realized sooner. Maybe some of them had and hadn't wanted to say anything, either from their own amusement or from hopeful denial, wishing to be wrong. This city was the capital of Alvarez, the seat of Ziref's power. Ziref's army as Spriggan had not been small. He should have had thousands of men here, even as just a defensive force. He could spare that with how massively he outnumbered everyone, and the risk of losing Alvarez's capital would have been the same feeling they would have gotten in a normal war if they lost Crocus. Beyond the soldiers too, they should have been civilians here. Ziref's army was so large because he turned the continent of Alakatasia into an empire through a war against all guilds present. It wasn't the might of a single country but many all under a single unified banner. But this should have taken time, and from what they knew of Alvarez it didn't seem like Spriggan was disliked. He had militarized them but he hadn't turned them into a full conscripted army. People should have been here in the city. People should have been going about their everyday lives, kids should be playing in the streets, there should be smiles. And yet all that greeted them were corpses, the skin torn from their bones and leaving nothing but black skeletons as a reminder that they had existed. And now that they were looking and were further into the city, they numbered in the thousands. The ones nearer out must have been crushed, muttered Warad sorrowfully. People must have been desperate to flee. I hope some did make it. Me too, Ichigo muttered back, still in shock at the sight. Seeing death, that wasn't an unfamiliar sight to him any longer. But it had never been on this scale. There had only been one incident with so much sudden loss of life like this, and looking around at the skeletons he had a feeling he knew why this sight was setting him so on edge. Magical barrier particles don't cause bodies to decompose faster, do they, by any chance? Not that I've seen, Aoyasu stated as he walked up towards the skeletons. He gently lifted one of the skulls from the ground, causing the magical barrier particles still lingering to scatter as he flared up his magic, before chucking the skull at Warod. The man had to hurry to catch it, his staff slipping from his grasp as he prioritized catching the skull before shooting an angry look at the blacksmith. "Just examine it, won't you? Yor and Ichigo are some of the most familiar with Baragan's magic." Reluctantly doing as the man said, Warod eyed the skull closely. Ichigo didn't need to. He already knew his answer, hoping it was wrong rather than looking for evidence to prove him right. At a few moments of consideration, Warod let out a sigh, leaning down to place the skull carefully against the porch of a nearby house before reclaiming his staff from the ground. "There's no mistaking it," he whispered quietly, the unnatural silence letting his words be heard regardless. The energy had changed somewhat, but life wasn't robbed from these poor people. It was lost through time, forcefully accelerated. Only far more cruelly, I'd reckon. Give it another day or two, going by the lingering energy that touches them, and they'd become nothing more than dust. Considering how fast the energy might have decayed, I don't think they were aged to this point in a few seconds. More like hours, maybe a day or two. I'm sure they were still alive for most of it, watching as their bodies withering beyond their control and kept them from fleeing as their bodies grew worse. Sighing sadly, Warod took one look towards the way they had arrived from before turning back. I doubt any escaped now. Something tore its way through here. Any close enough to flee probably became dust by now. So this confirms it, Hibarian stated. Avatar succeeded. They brought Baragan back. I'd hoped that wouldn't be the case, muttered Ichigo, trying to swallow his building anger at the sight around them and failing quickly. If he tore his way in through here. Why whack, if you had a god complex, where would you go to in this city? I sense an insult in that, why whack shot back, his gaze already locked on the central and tallest of the towers still standing. He'll be up there most likely. The throne room is a potential candidate for him, but the magical barrier particles appear to get worse near the roof. I cannot even perceive anything up there. It's where he'll be, watching over his dominion of death. Then let's go put him down before he can spread it any further. Hold up a second, said Hibarian suddenly, his eyes locked on a shadow in a nearby side street. There's someone here. Raising his palm towards the form he could see, he began to close his hand, as if grabbing hold of something. A grunt of pain erupted from the shadows before Hibarian pulled back with his hand, the form of a cloaked woman being pulled free from her hiding spot. Warod was about to offer a hand out to help her before the lingering presence of magical barrier particles made him freeze. These ones didn't carry the same foulness that Baragan's did. It seems one of Avatar's cultists stuck around, Hibarian stated for them, crouching down beside the woman before forcefully turning her over with his magic. The process revealed a large gaping wound in her side, however, similar magical barrier particles to those around them eating away at her flesh. From the look of it, you probably have a few hours left, Hibarian stated calmly. A few hours of agony. That energy is eating away at you, and none of us have a reason to save you. You'll die. But I can offer you the choice of having that option now rather than later. Their members are fanatics, Warod grumbled. They won't make dash. I'll talk. The woman managed to mutter weakly, groaning in pain as more of her side was eaten away. Just make it stop. Please. I am a man of my word, Hibarian promised her. Now then, what happened? What did Baragan do? Baragan. The woman looked confused for a moment until Hibarian pointed at the carnage. Oh, the one did this. She groaned again in pain. I didn't know his name, she muttered weakly. I'm just an acolyte. Low ranking. I heard stuff about hosts and a return. For Mimiheiji. That was all we knew about him until recently. Go on. The woman clenched her teeth, swallowing another groan of pain before forcing herself to speak. The priest came back a few days ago. Took the disciples and the chosen others with him. They went to perform the ritual. The rest of us. We were on standby. Nearby or here, so we could stop people if needed. I don't know what happened. But then. And then what? Why whack demanded, his voice making her freeze as she turned to look up at him. Well? We're waiting. Talk. I. Talk or we'll walk. We don't need you nearly as much as you need us. The woman nodded shakily, forcing her gaze away from Wywak towards Hyborian, who was giving the other man an annoyed look. There was a pillar of our god's energy. And then something shot towards the city. It cut through like a storm, and the air was filled. I thought it was the arrival of our Messiah. That the promised land was being built. But you all began to die, Hyborian muttered. One after the other. Yes, the woman confirmed. We should have been safe. We were briefly. But our god's energy, it. She let out a groan of pain again, clutching her side as if hoping it would help dull the pain. The energy abandoned them, stated Wywak for the others' benefit. Obviously it was drawn to the stronger force, abandoning them for Baragan. And as it left them open to its effects. I was lucky, the woman muttered. The others, they fell faster. Our god's energy had been familiar to me for some time. I managed to keep hold of it for a bit longer. It left early this morning, a few hours after the last of the others died. I see, Hyborian muttered. I understand now why you were so willing to talk. You've lost your devotion, haven't you? Can't a girl hate what's killing her? The woman tried to joke, her brief attempt to laugh being interrupted by another groan of pain, worse than before. I don't want to wait to die. I don't know what our aim was here, and I don't care enough to struggle long enough to find out. I just want this to end. Very well. Then as promised, I will kill you now. Hold on a moment, Wywak stated, Hyborian pausing in the actions as the woman turned a terrified look up at the Quincy. Don't worry, you can go and die soon. But before that I wish to know something. You must have seen Baragan pass by. Judging by the fact it took until this morning for the magical barrier particles at your disposal to leave you, it's safe to assume Baragan isn't quite in control as much as he could be yet. Did you heard him say anything as he passed? Or anything in the distance? The woman frowned for a moment, trying to think and ignore the pain still causing her to pause to try and deal with it. I think, he said something about Ichigo. Mostly the name Kurosaki, I think. He was screaming it. A lot. And cursing the world and screaming out for things to die. I'm not. She paused for a moment before forcing herself to continue. I'm not sure he was talking to anything. Just saying things. Thank you. Go ahead and perish. Without a second thought, energy burst to life in his palm before it slammed down straight into the woman's body, white flames forming and burning her as she began to scream. With only a moment's hesitation at the sight, Hyborian immediately brought his hand up and closed it tightly into a fist. In an instant the woman's screams ended, only a groan being released before she moved no further, the flames burning her body away no longer bothering her. That was uncalled for, Hyborian muttered, his hand still clenched in a tight fist as he turned his fury towards Wywak. She helped us. She helped herself, Wywak stated. Spurned by her god, she sought to retaliate and lash out at him in the only way she had left. Humans never change. It's almost pathetic really. Even so, I promised her a swift death. And my method would have been swift too. Intense agony for a minute or two or agony over hours. I was ending her life quickly, as she wished. But I will not show mercy to an enemy, no matter their sob story. She was one of Mimihagi's followers, and apparently familiar enough with his energy to keep it with her until the morning despite Baragan's strong presence in the city. She was certainly no innocent individual, despite her position on Avatar's food chain. Her death was the one she deserved. Even so, I gave her my word. And you kept it. Good for you. You were able to keep your moral high ground. Enough, Ichibe ordered before either could say any more. We need to press on. Baragan is close, and his power is only going to grow. We are lucky right now. If his power came even close to Mimihagi's, the energy that girl used would have been taken from her within a moment of sensing his presence. Obviously its allegiance is only shifting now as it begins to realize he's got a high chance of fulfilling its objectives. We have to cut him down before he can become too strong for us all to handle. Turning towards the tallest tower, Ichibe pointed up towards it. We will follow Waiwaka's advice and head towards the peak. If he isn't there, then we will blow away layer by layer of this city until we find him. Ichigo, can you sense Mavis yet? Ichigo frowned for a moment, one hand brushing against the makeshift sheath he had for the dagger around his left arm. Warod had been kind enough to make it for him, even if it wasn't the most comfortable thing to wear, and it made carrying the dagger around a lot easier until he could reach Mavis. Letting a hand rest against the hilt of it, hidden beneath his clothes, he tried to reach out towards the sensation once more before feeling something hit back. Ichigo. His gaze snapped up towards the peak of the tower. He had hardly realized he had been about to charge forward until Warod had grabbed him by the arm. Ichigo? What's wrong? It's her, muttered Ichigo in panic. Her voice Warod. She's terrified. I've never heard her that scared. If she's scared, that's good, Waiwaka stated, ignoring the glare he got from Warod. She isn't in pain right now, I take it, which means she is still safe. Fairy sphere must still be holding. Quite impressive to stand against so many magical barrier particles for so long. She must be using all her power to keep the shield going. We shouldn't wait much longer then, Ichibe muttered. However, we still need to reach the Celestial Spirit King. Ichigo, I will be entrusting this task to you. To me? She's up there right now and calling for me, Ichigo stated angrily. I need to hurry before dash. She will be fine, Ichibe calmly stated, taking a step forward and resting a hand on Ichigo's shoulder. So take this time and calm yourself. Acting rashly will not help her here, nor will it help you. Head to where Zeref said the Celestial Spirit King was and free him from the prison he is in, and then both of you rejoin us. If we're being honest anyway, it'll be better if you aren't there originally, Ichigo, Aoyasu stated seriously, glancing from Ichigo to back towards the tower. Baragan hates you. Probably more now than he ever did. Before he knows you'll hear, I'd like to get a feel for how he fights. Once he sees you, he'll either focus you down or go wild and try and destroy everything, I reckon. Ichigo frowned at that, but he couldn't really dismiss Aoyasu's words. All right, he muttered quietly. I'll be close by, so once I've freed the Celestial Spirit King you should expect us shortly afterwards. Hopefully he won't mind not being filled it much. Excellent, said Ichibe in response. Then the rest of us shall head to the peak. You should all be prepared for this. Once we begin to fight, all options to retreat will be lost to us. Protector of the Fairies. Did you have fun, Emperor Spriggan? Fun? I have no idea what you mean. So that wasn't you playing house? Irene asked the Dark Mage, a tone bordering on mocking in her words. You seemed to go through a lot of work to prepare that house. Did my work help live up to your expectations? The place was absolutely disgusting, Zeref stated. So yes, you did good. Not many things can make me want to throw up at the mere sight of it. You got the detail down perfectly, so much so that I had to resist killing you for showing me the site. I suppose it could have been considered a bit of payback for the disgust you've made me feel over the centuries. Though your newfound focus is certainly better than your one-sided views of destruction from before. Zeref raised an eyebrow at her words. He knew what she was implying, but she had never outright stated that she knew who he was, nor had he ever confirmed or denied anything. She was wise at least to avoid bringing up the topic too much or overstepping her boundaries. However much she knew, or even remembered, she at least never forgot that she owed a debt to him as Spriggan, not Zeref. Pushing past the topic, he glanced around at their temporary battlefield before pushing towards the topics of their plans. I assume you have finished preparations. Of course, Irene replied, her staff tapping the ground briefly and making a show of remodeling the ground. The territory is already under my grasp. When the order is given, I will create our true battlefield. Good. I trust August and the others are in position. That they are, Irene answered with a smirk. A bold move, I have to say. Taking advantage of the disappearance of those capable of standing up to you. A better opportunity has never presented itself, though. Is it still possible to reach Lumen Histoire in time? A lot of strong mages will still stand in our way, and Acknowledge will tie us up here for some time. August is there, Zeref stated calmly. He is more than enough to push forward. Be it their generals or guild leaders or S-class mages, none hold a candle to him. Let him know to push towards the location of Fairy Tale. I want him to take Magnolia before the abomination can return, so I can greet him sitting in his old home on a throne made of bones. And when he arrives, you will unleash Lumen Histoire, correct? Zeref nodded absent-mindedly, letting her continue in her own beliefs. It was far easier to allow the members of his empire to believe that Lumen Histoire was still there in Magnolia than tell them the truth of its location or abilities. Even now Irene still hadn't realized it was more than an infinite well of magic. You are sure your magic managed to infiltrate the barrier properly? Irene nodded, one hand held against her hip confidently. Of course. With how many holes that have been made over it, I have had amply amounts of time to spread my magic. Barragan's hollows truly have helped us move forward your timetable. If not for them, I would have needed another few weeks of sneaking magic through the gaps. Very good. I am impressed that you managed to find ways to penetrate the barrier in the first place. Most magic that tried to take advantage of those openings failed to grasp the chances properly. Scoffing, Irene shook her head at the mere thought of being compared to the other mages. You considered that there were some in Alvarez that could surpass my control in this area? Me, a high enchantress. Not at all. A human could hardly hold up to a dash. To a more experienced human, Irene cut in, stressing the words clearly with fire burning in her eyes. Zeref gave her a glance before nodding in agreement. So she was still clinging to that stupid mindset. How foolish. Considering what she was going to do, she would be so much better off if she accepted her own situation. Acknowledge it did, and he. Well, maybe he wasn't the best example. It's time, Zeref stated, leading Irene down towards the waiting others. Halfway down he managed to spot the word mage he had requested, Levia waiting right where he had told her to remain. Ah good, she listens well, he muttered, watching as she read through the book in front of her. That book, I assume that is the book of E.N.D. Irene asked, Zeref nodding in response. Had to layer a temporary seal on it to keep Natsu as his current self. No point in revealing a trump card too early. Hopefully this has been enough time for the girl to memorize the book completely. I'd do the work myself, but I'm not nearly as fast. Does she know of what she'll be doing? She'll figure it out, Zeref stated, a vicious smirk across his face. I hope she doesn't falter, but I wouldn't have picked her for this if not for her skill and connection to Fairy Tale. And I suppose this has nothing to do with the abomination you speak of so much. Nothing at all, Zeref shot back, his words leaving no room for argument. Go. Do your job and draw Acknowledge to us. There is no better bait than you when it comes to him. Protector of the Fairies. Where the hell is Zeref? I'm getting tired of waiting here, stated Natsu, crossing his arms in annoyance as he glanced around the open field again. Gajeel nearby let out a growl, annoyed at the question they all were thinking. Don't be too impatient. You realize the sooner he gets here the sooner we'll have to fight Acknowledge. I'm fine with delaying it another minute or two. Sorry to disappoint, came the voice of a woman, the group turning to find the same woman that had greeted them initially walking towards them. But the plan is about to begin. Irene right? Laxus asked, frowning as she walked past them all without a second look. So, where's Spriggan? Is he not going to be here for the start of this? Emperor Spriggan has taken refuge nearby and is standing by to assist with your fellow mage. He is safer there away from the front lines. Safer, yeah, Natsu muttered. Like that's true. Regardless, the time has come, Irene stated, coming to a stop in front of them before discarding her staff to one side and throwing away the long coat she wore across her shoulders along with her hat. This is going to be a bit unpleasant. If it wasn't for Emperor Spriggan's sake, I would never take this form again. This form? Muttered Laxus, noticing with the rest of them when her magical power began to skyrocket. What the hell are you doing? Something you should probably pay attention to considering your current situation, Irene replied, her voice morphing as her body began to change. Flesh began to crack before they revealed familiar scales. She raised a hand briefly to her face, watching as its structure began to morph and claws began to form, before she pulled it away and willed the transformation to hurry up, keeping her eyes away from the change and focused on the sky instead. The others couldn't do the same. As the seconds passed, it began apparent that she was growing in size. Her human form began to disappear entirely and become replaced by one more like a beast, her neck widening and extending while her teeth sharpened to deadly points. From her back sprouted an even more familiar sight, wings spanning the length of her body expanding and beating a few times, their movements slow at first as if they hadn't been used in some time and were being relearned. The rest of the transformation didn't take long, but by now they all knew what they were looking for. There was only one word for it, one Wendy managed to say for them in shock. "Dragon. Don't call me that." Irene roared, her head shooting towards Wendy and stopping an inch away from her body. At such close proximity they could practically feel the magic from her, radiating off her body in waves. "I am human. This explains why your magic seemed so odd to us," Sting stated, ignoring the glare shot towards him. "You're like Acknowledge, aren't you? A dragon slayer who turned into a dragon." "Wrong. I am the mother of dragon slayers. The queen of dragons. But I am human. You sure don't look it." Irene paused for a moment, simply staring at the dragon slayer. "I wonder. Spriggan doesn't need all of you for this plan, right? I'm sure he's underestimating his own significance. Yes, maybe I'll just kill you so the rest of you listen." "This isn't the time to be fighting," Toshiro stated, keeping an eye on the horizon. Could Acknowledge have sensed that? Probably. But if he didn't? Irene brought her head back round, opening her mouth before letting out an earth-shattering roar. The others had to hurry to cover their ears, the sound almost deafening them all for the few seconds it continued for. When Irene looked back towards them, her expression showed nothing beyond cruel amusement at their pain. There. He should be here within dash. However long she planned to say, it proved to be wrong. None of them even had a chance to react as Blur landed on the ground beside the dragon, one hand held out with sharp claws for fingers. It took only a moment for them to recognize the foe, and another to recognize the liquid staining them. They were already coated with blood. As if in slow motion to their eyes, they could only watch in horror as Irene began to fall, half of her neck ripped out along with her right wing completely torn from her body, lying beside Acknowledge's feet. Time didn't pick back up for them until Irene hit the ground, laying there unresponsive to the world. "One down," Acknowledge stated, turning a cold look upon them all before he suddenly appeared before Wendy, his arm raised up high. 7 to go. Protector of the Fairies. The strength of the Dragon King. Wendy. Natsu was already lunging at the dragon as he brought his arm down, his eyes watching as the strike moved much faster than he was. He wasn't going to make it. The realization struck him like a hammer and he felt his blood freeze at the feeling. Lightning sparked around Laxus, but he knew the older man wouldn't make it either. He hadn't had enough time to activate his magic to move in time, and they knew firsthand how fast Acknowledge could move. Right as Acknowledge's claw was about to reach Wendy though, she vanished. One moment she was there, the next Acknowledge's claw was slicing through thin air. What happened? He was desperate to look around, to search for any signs of where Wendy had vanished to, but he couldn't afford to. Not when fury was starting to form on Acknowledge's face, from being denied his kill, and in a moment it would be turned on them. Before that happened he was going to strike. In the end, someone beat him to it. In a burst of speed, God Serena was right before Acknowledge, wind forming and condensing in his palm, and he pressed it forward without hesitation. The wind that was released actual served to blow them all back, a hurricane of power slamming into Acknowledge's body and forcing him back a few steps. But only a few steps. In the next moment he had burst through the tornado, taking advantage of its fading power before slamming his fist straight into God Serena's chest. The Ukin barely had a moment to gasp out in pain before he vanished from their sight. Unlike with Wendy though, this time it wasn't due to him suddenly disappearing. It was because the blow had already sent him flying into the distance. With God Serena gone briefly, Acknowledge had already turned his attention on them. He wasted no time in closing the distance as Acknowledge began to move, pulling up as much magic as he could quickly and wrapping it around his fist. Dragon Slayer's secret art. His spell never got finished. Acknowledge had already closed the gap between them and grabbed his fist in his palm, the flames slamming against it and trying to break free before being crushed out of existence. Lightning burst into existence behind Acknowledge, Laxus on the move, but with one swing he found himself being thrown by Acknowledge over his shoulder, straight into the path of his own ally. A storm of iron immediately slammed into Acknowledge the moment he was free from the dragon's grip. He didn't have to look around for the source, knowing there was only one person responsible for that kind of attack. He just wished he could have believed it did something for a bit longer, as the sight of Acknowledge walking straight through it towards Gajeel himself was rather soul-crushing. While he was trying to get back to his feet, Laxus getting ready to move with him, they found Sting beating them to it. Braving the iron flying around Acknowledge where it smashed and got deflected off his skin, Sting ducked in close, white light glowing around both of his fists before he slammed them forward. It didn't matter that Acknowledge caught both hands by the wrists, not when the magic still fired forward and slammed into the dragon, planting seals where they hit. With that, even if briefly Acknowledge's movements would be. He never got to finish hoping on that sight. The sound of the seals shattering was audibly to all. As if mocking to mock the caster, Acknowledge pressed on further, ignoring the storm of iron Gajeel was trying to maintain to do something. In just a single moment, Sting was forced to his knees, Acknowledge's grip pushing down on him more and more until they could hear something snap under the pressure. Sting screamed for only a moment before Acknowledge discarded him like a broken toy, throwing him to one side and looking away from the Silent Slayer. Even from this distance though, Natsu could see Sting trying to cradle his hands. His wrists looked broken, his hands bent back much further than they should have been. Anger overtook him and he blasted himself forward with flames, Laxus easily keeping pace with him as they sped forward together. The storm of iron wasn't even considered anymore. Whatever danger it might pose was the lesser of two evils, and it was much easier to ignore the feeling of iron slicing skin when a monster such as this was in front of them, crushing them without a sweat being broken. Lightning exploded out from Laxus's fist as he made to swung, and he responded with as much intensity as he could pull up. Flames summoned his call, surrounding his fist and making it look 5 times its size, as he swung forward. At his left it looked like Laxus had a similar idea, trying to pack as much power as he could into that single strike. He wasn't messing around either, not when it was his dragonified arm that he was using. But even as they swung, Acknowledge was turning to meet them. His own attack was caught, but he didn't care too much, not when Acknowledge tried the same thing on Laxus and Actual had his arm pushed back. For a moment he Actual believed Laxus's strike would hit Acknowledge. That hope lasted until Acknowledge forced himself to a complete stop, the fist held tightly in place even as Laxus tried to pull it free. He tried the same himself, releasing all the stored flames in a blast straight ahead, but all it did was singe some of the hairs along Acknowledge's arm. "I expected more," Acknowledge muttered. "You were far more dangerous a month ago. And now all you lot are doing is resorting to pathetic tricks." Acknowledge's head turned as the storm of iron began to let up the smallest amount, glaring at Gajeel even as the iron sword he had turned his arm into was swung at him. For all its strength and sharpens though, it only scratched him. "Is that all you've dash?" Acknowledge immediately cut himself off as stepped back, pulling both Natsu and Laxus with him and almost pulling them into the arc of a blade aimed for his throat. Taoshiro scowled in annoyance, immediately trying to push his attack with another swing, but this time Acknowledge was ready for it. Abandoning his grip on the 2 dragon slayers he held, he threw them away and used one of his now free hands to reach up and grab the sword, catching it in his grasp and tightening his grip until the metal began to crack. "I forgot one of you had a weapon like this. But it seems it still isn't hard enough to cut my scales. I was wary of it for nothing." With just a bit more pressure, the sword snapped. Taoshiro's shock at the sight proved detrimental when he was suddenly grabbed by the front of his shirt before he could react and thrown into the ground. He was already trying to move when a foot slammed into his back, a scream being released as he was forcefully pressed further into the earth. Merely tilting his body slightly, Acknowledge avoided the attack from Laxus before spinning and slamming a leg into Laxus's side, sending him flying across the ground and skidding to a complete stop far away. Trying to work together, Natsu and Gajeel charged him at once, the latter turning his skin to iron while the former coated himself entirely in flames. For the latter, the effort proved useless. With one blow to his chest, Gajeel found his iron shattering as Acknowledge easily broke through, feeling like some of his ribs had snapped as he was fired backwards from the blow. Only Natsu was left, slamming straight into the dragon with all of his strength and beginning to tug on the power of the sky that he could call on. He couldn't finish the action though, not when he was pushed back with a flick of the man's arm. His attempts to lunge forward and press the assault ended when a foot slammed into his kneecap, shattering it and causing him to scream as he was forced to one knee from the pain. His screams were immediately cut off when Acknowledge pressed a hand over his mouth, his claws digging into the side of his head. And then he began to apply pressure. His head felt like it was caving in. It was all he could do to try and bring up a hand to grab onto Acknowledge's own, desperate to pull it free as he began to apply his magic to it. But it might as well have been tickling Acknowledge for all the good it did him. Then suddenly the pressure was gone, and standing before him was God Serena, pulling the hand Acknowledge had on him from his head. It looked like he was struggling to do so, but for Natsu the fact he managed even that was a miracle when he hadn't been able to even resist. But he could tell that this wasn't going to end well. Acknowledge was switching his focus, and from the worry present in the previously overconfident man he would have to be a fool to know that this wasn't good. Sting couldn't use his hands, Taoshiro looked like he had his back broken, Gajeel and Laxus had both taken heavy blows that sent them flying, he had one busted knee, and Wendy was God knows where. God Serena had said he couldn't fight Acknowledge alone, and yet right now it looked like that was the most likely outcome. Had they even believed they could beat this monster? That was his single thought before the world around them was engulfed by a bright light. Protector of the Fairies. This isn't good, Levi muttered, watching the battle from afar with dread. Could she even call this a battle, she wondered? No, she couldn't. This was more like one-sided annihilation. She would have preferred to have seen them struggling than this because that would have at least meant that they had a chance. Those fools. What are they doing? Obviously Ziref seemed to have very different thoughts on the fight though, judging by the furious look he had on his face. I told them not to hold back, and here they are not using their full strength. Yeah, I think it's hard to remember when they are panicking so much, Levi managed to say in defense. If she was this terrified from this far away, watching as a spectator for the most part, how much it feel being right in front of such a monster. To see every single strike mean nothing? They're just trying to force him back to regroup. It'd be far too dangerous to use their strongest strikes when they'd catch each other in the blast, especially without Wendy nearby. Yes, where did that girl get to? Ziref muttered, his eyes glancing around the battlefield for her before quickly giving up. She's not dead at least. The magic I felt seemed familiar, so she must have used Nirvana on pure instinct. Though utilizing it with a desire to flee or get somewhere safe could have put her hundreds of miles away for all we know. She probably doesn't even know how to get back. Glancing at the book resting in her lap, Levi frowned as he touched the cover before looking towards Natsu and then back to Ziref. Acknowledge fears End, right? That's what you said? You want to reveal our trump card now? Ziref asked, glancing at the battle ongoing warily as he watched the efforts of each dragon slayer fail one after the other. I had hoped to save this, but it looks like we can't afford to wait around if this keeps up. We need Acknowledge to be pushed onto the defensive, or to at least have his entire focus stolen by someone. End can do that, but hopefully the rest can recover in that time to save him before he's killed. If it can buy them even a single minute, I'm sure they can try and recover a bit, Levi muttered, sounding unsure about that even to her own ears. Let's just... What's that? Oh, muttered Ziref as a blast of light tore upwards from where Irene had fallen, a magic circle fading from view under his intense gaze. Seems she's more resilient than I thought. Forgot about End for the moment. We are about to get the time we need. Protector of the Fairies. The world disappeared. That was all Laxus could say to describe it. One moment he was staring at the sight of Acknowledge about to clash again with God Serena, Natsu crouched helplessly behind the Dragon Slayer of Alvarez, and the next an intense light had blinded him. When it had finally cleared, Acknowledge was gone, and only the massive amount of magical power still able to sensed in the far distance revealed his presence nearby. Looking around briefly, he could see them all tightly together. Wendy has back too, a shocked look on her face that seemed to have stopped the tears that seemed to have been streaming down her face. I'm back, she whispered, sounded like she didn't even believe her own words. I got back. Wendy? Natsu asked, seemingly more confused by her sudden appearance than the fact the world had altered around them. Where did you go? She tightened her hands into fists, frustration evident in her face, before he immediately took note of Natsu's shattered knee. She didn't even hesitate at crouching in front of it, her healing magic acting at full force as she worked rapidly to heal his wound. I panicked, she muttered in shame. I thought I was going to die and wanted to get away. Not to run, just to get away from the danger. I used nirvana on instinct and... She let out a sad sigh as she took note of the rest of their injuries. I ended up on Tenro Island. Laxus tried to avoid showing his shock. Others though weren't so good at it, Sting speaking up at Wendy moved over to him the moment she was sure Natsu's knee was healed enough to be able to be moved. How on earth did you get back? Wendy shook her head in disappointment before admitted that she hadn't. It wasn't me, I think. I was trying but I couldn't remember where we had been and kept disappearing and reappearing around the island. And then suddenly I was here. She glanced around briefly as she moved from Sting to Taoshiro, moving her hands to his back and letting the glow spread further to deal with the large spread of damage. I don't recognize this place. I don't think we should, Laxus muttered, getting to his feet and taking a position in front of them all towards where he could sense Acknowledge in the far distance. For some reason the dragon hadn't returned yet, though its magic was fluctuating like crazy. Considering what had happened though, he had a theory on why. Universe 1. That was that woman's trump card, right? The one always planned to be used in the fight? Way I see it, this is her magic and she's restricted the world where Acknowledge is in such a way that she's keeping him busy, buying us time to recover. I thought she died, Wendy muttered, glancing around briefly and seeing no sign of the dragon they had as an ally. If she was able to cast that magic, where is she now? Probably hiding, Gajeel muttered, frowning as he glanced at the ground before slamming his fist against a spot that had caught his eye. Smiling at the sight he pulled what appeared to be a chunk of ore free before depositing it straight into his mouth. Hey kid, don't worry about fixing me up. That woman's hooked me up here. This battlefield is slightly more ideal, God Serena muttered. Iron for one dragon slayer, a large size lake for me to take advantage of it we get pressed over there, and enough time for us to be ready this time when Acknowledge appears. I know, we should have started all out, Sting muttered, cradling his arms still even though the pain had disappeared thanks to Wendy. With her work done to the best she could in the time they had on Taoshiro, she quickly hurried over to Laxus before being waved off and pushed towards God Serena, beginning to heal his broken ribs. Thought in those moments. I kept thinking to try and push him back and then go all out once he wasn't bearing down on one of us. He did that intentionally, God Serena stated. He didn't want to give us much time to think. By striking as fast as he did and shrugging off all you threw at him, he meant to crush all hope we had of victory. It's why he sent me flying as quickly as he could. He knew I'd be able to put a stop to that if he didn't get rid of me quickly. He wanted this to be over quickly, to end it once and for all. Don't act like you didn't forget to go all out in the chaos. I didn't forget, God Serena shot back. I can't. You can't. Laxus growled out, desperately wanting to turn his head back round and give the self-absorbed dragon slayer a piece of his mind but didn't dare out of fear of Acknowledge reappearing in that single moment. This isn't a play or a performance. If you are holding back out of some kind of sick amusement dash. I mean I can't, God Serena said as he cut him off, sounding reluctant to even admit this. I'm strong. But it takes me a bit of time to wake up if you would. Trying to get 8 different forms of Dragon Slayer magic beating in sync with one another isn't easy, and it is stressful to maintain too. I can activate one immediately but keeping it going without shutting down another one is tough at the beginning. Until I can kickstart all 8 at once, I won't be at my strongest. And you decided now was the best time to tell us this? When you had dozens of chances earlier. Admit my greatest weakness to people who could very well refuse and betray us if they felt like they'd have a better chance at fighting Acknowledge by themselves. God Serena scoffed. I think not. Besides, even currently I was pressuring him more than you all were. And I'm already starting to get into the swing of things. It should be relatively easy for the rest of you to hold out if you start fighting at full strength. He's right, Natsu stated, standing up carefully and testing his weight on his heeled knee before giving it a brief nod. Then, stepping slightly away from the group, he let flames form around his body before they burst up and intensify, the wind around him picking up. Heavenly Flame Dragon Mode, Release. I should have done this from the start, not that it alone will do much good against Acknowledge. He shrugged off attacks from this form before. If it makes an opening, it'll be enough, Laxus stated, flexing his dragonified arm for a moment before throwing away his cloak and revealing the rest of his half-dragonified form to the rest. We stick to the plan, he explained as lightning began to course all along his body, intensifying greatly around his inhuman parts. An all-out assault. Sounds good to me, Sting stated, closing his eyes for a moment as light erupted around his body before he managed to tap into the familiar sensation, his magic falling back into that twilight state that he had only had a chance to use a few times before. If he's going to block our attacks, let's make sure he has to work at it and open up a chance for the next. If it helps, this iron does give me an idea, Gajeel stated, pulling out more and continuing eating. Think you can keep Acknowledge busy for a bit? I promise it'll be worth it. If we can, Taoshiro stated, gripping his broken sword as he forced himself to his feet, groaning from the pain that still remained across his back. Bankai, Daiguren Hyorin Meru. He felt the ice immediately dull the pain, a protective coating of ice covering his back and spreading into wings. I might need a bit of time myself though, he added as he glanced at the flower petals of ice that hovered in the air behind him. My Bankai's full strength needs a bit of time to build before it can be unleashed. If it really comes down to a battle of endurance, we can at least guarantee a strong influx of power if we can hang on long enough. I'll do my best to support you all, Wendy stated, waving her hands out as she finished healing the last of them before applying support magic upon support magic over them, enhancing their strength, speed, defensive and resistant to anything she could think of. Then, with that magic in effect, she placed the same on herself before calling upon the power of Dragon Force, her hair changing color and going wild behind her. If any of you get hurt, I'll heal you as fast as I can. So please everyone else keep Acknowledge away. As long as I can move, I'll try and make sure the rest of you can too. We all know our roles, Laxus stated, the presence of Acknowledge finally beginning to get closer. It seemed whatever trap that had held him had shattered now. We've been given a second chance. Let's not waste it this time. Protector of the Fairies. Are you just going to sit there, Jin? The silver-haired man didn't say a word, simply continuing to sit cross-legged and staring off into the same direction as before. Jin. Go on ahead, Invel. I'm sure our Emperor gave us his orders. He did, agreed Invel, his arms crossed in annoyance. Including you. Get moving. Jin shook his head. Sorry, but I'm not in the mood right now. I think I might just stay right here. Just ignore him, Invel, Brandish said, walking past the two to stare at the wide open space towards them. We have to take advantage of this opportunity. I still can't believe she pulled it off, Aziel muttered in disbelief. I know Emperor Spriggan said she was powerful, but he never said she was capable of this. Invel nodded, looking around at their forces. The world had only changed a few minutes ago, but they were already on the march. And this time there was no barrier to worry about, not when golden shards hovering in odd locations in the environment, as if pieces had been cut out of place and mixed around when the landscape altered. How long do you think we have? Brandish asked as she came to a stop at the edge of the cliff they stood on. Before her magic ends and the world gets reverted back to normal. Unknown. It depends on how long she herself can maintain this spell for. I'm sure it's taking a lot of focus on her part. We're lucky she managed to gather us all up so close together when she rearranged everything. Which is why you should be moving, Jin. Don't worry about me, Jin muttered. I'm fine here. You said the world will revert back in due time. Invel frowned. Yes, but why does this matter? We should be taking advantage of this. I'm sure August is doing the work of a dozen of us, Jin shot back. It hardly matters if I step back this time. Emperor Spriggan will be mad, Brandish pointed out. I don't think you'll want that. I think I can deal with it this time. Briefly turning his attention to them, Jin gave them a small wave, trying to shoo them away. You should get going if you don't want to experience the same feat. Brandish looked at him uncertainly because forcefully turning his gaze away. Please don't do anything rash. We've already lost some of us. With her piece said, she quickly stepped off the edge of the cliff, disappearing briefly until a gigantic version of herself reappeared and began running forward past the marching army. Envel let out a sigh of his own before abandoning any attempts at trying to convince Jin to follow them, taking a path of ice downwards towards the forces below. You're not going? Jin asked, noticing the fact Aziel had yet to leave. Thought you would have loved a battle like this. What are you after? Jin frowned, surprised by the sudden seriousness from a man usually so carefree. Are you worried? You're one of us, Aziel muttered. And what you're doing right now? Spriggan will have you killed. This is an act of direct disobedience. I suppose it is. Which is why I have to know, Aziel added when it became apparent Jin was going to elaborate any further without being pushed. What you're doing. Is it really worth it? Jin tilted his head curiously for a moment before giving the man his usual creepy smile. Why did you join Alvarez, Aziel? What do you mean? It's not a trick question, Jin stated. We all have our reasons. Dymeria was raised and taught duty from an early age. Brandish wanted power and revenge, Envel sought order, even August has some old desire considering he's been around in Alvarez for longer than all of us put together. What's yours? Mine, huh? Aziel had to think about it for a moment until a singular answer appeared before him. To fight. I figured. You're so simple sometimes. If you knew, why did you even bother asking? Aziel asked in annoyance. So? What's yours? Mine, huh? Jin turned away, returning his gaze to the horizon. I guess you could say I joined for revenge. Not against Spriggan, don't get all worried and try and attack me or something. It's just that joining Alvarez was the thing that would get me closest to my goals. That's all. And now you don't need Alvarez anymore. I won't for much longer, Jin whispered. You should go. I don't mind if I die after this, but I do plan to at least achieve my dream before Spriggan retaliates. You should be able to understand that at least. I think I do, Aziel muttered. So this is goodbye, huh? I hate goodbyes. They sound too much like endings. That's because they are, Jin said, turning back towards Aziel and giving the man the first natural smile he had ever shown in his presence. You were amusing, for what it's worth. I might even miss you. If you don't mind me asking, where were you before Irene's magic activated? That's why you refuse to move, right? You're waiting to go back. Where was I? Jin muttered quietly. I guess you could say I was watching another massacre. Protector of the Fairies. He's here. Laxus roared out as Acknowledge appeared in the distance, nothing more than a speck in the sky. Within a few moments he was already right before them, his form that of a complete dragon's as he let out an earth-shattering roar. With one of his massive claws raised up he slammed it down against the earth, barely missing Natsu and Taoshiro as they darted out of the way. Going for size, are you? Asked God Serena as he darted between Acknowledge's legs, fire leaking from the edges of his mouth as he held the energy tightly in his grasp and mixed in wind. Thanks for the bigger target. In one massive burst he released the mixture of magic straight upwards in a roar, pushing Acknowledge off the ground and up a decent distance in the sky. Immediately the Dragon Slayers were making chase, Natsu leading the charge as he shot forward in the most direct route possible, the flames from his hands acting as boosters to propel him forward. The wind picked up as he poured more magic forth, his flames expanding and gathering to far greater heights as he accelerated as fast as he could. As Acknowledge turned towards him, he changed tactics completely, swinging both arms forward and turning the boosters into blasts, all the intense flames he had summoned being fired straight at Acknowledge point blank. An arm swung through the flames to try and swat him away, but his own attack had already pushed him back, others moving to take his place in the offensive. Lightning tore forward in massive amounts as Laxus swung his dragonified fist forward, smashing it against the arm brought up to try and block the strike. This time he managed to get somewhere though, knocking Acknowledge back across the air from the force of his blow and the lightning behind it. Taoshiro was there immediately to capitalize on the advantage, swinging his sword up as he flew and releasing dragon after dragon of ice, each circling around Acknowledge's massive form. The first shattered when Acknowledge's claws smashed into them, but the second did its job, wrapping around the limb and letting more sneak past and wrap around the dragon before locking themselves in place as solid ice. It wouldn't last. Any of them could tell that, especially when all it took was Acknowledge to try and break the shackles binding him to cause them to crack. But before they could, Sting was there, appearing in a flash of light above Acknowledge with dark and white energies mixing around his fist. White Shadow Dragon's dazzling fist. Swinging with all his might, he was treated by the first bit of pain from Acknowledge as his fist made contact, sending the dragon crashing straight down towards the ground and leaving a crater where he hit. Did I do that? Sting muttered in disbelief. The shouts from the others drew his focus back and he quickly saw what they were, warning him apart, darting away as light and getting as clear away as he could. In the meantime, ice rained down from the sky, Toshiro not letting up as he bombarded Acknowledge's position. For a moment, it looked like it was working. And then Acknowledge roared and all his ice shattered, even the ice currently in flight. His wings didn't hold up any better, shattering into hundreds of pieces and would have resulting in him falling if he hadn't managed to catch himself on the air in time. As the smoke below cleared and the ice that had fallen was cleared away from the deafening sound, Acknowledge was revealed in all his fury below them, looking like he wasn't even hurt in the slightest. Any more was lost to Toshiro when Laxus grabbed him back the back of his shirt and dragged him away, getting them both clear as Natsu finished readying his flames far above them. Dragon Slayer's secret art. Natsu roared as he was thrown downwards by his flame's own propulsion. In retaliate, Acknowledge leapt up from the ground, his giant form closing in fast. It wasn't fast enough to stop Natsu raising his free hand, flames tightly packed in and ready to be released. Mode Burner, double variant. He shouted as he suddenly brought his other arm round, the inferno behind him being swept forward straight into the path of Acknowledge as the flames picked up around his other hand. Launch. The two streams hit Acknowledge at once, one already massive in size and slamming straight into the giant dragon's side. The second hit him dead on, crashing against his head and halting his momentum in the air. For a moment it looked like it would have been a stalemate, but in the end the flames began to win. Bit by bit, Acknowledge was being pushed back. But for all the success that I felt like, it was only natural in their minds that it wouldn't last. Smoke began to erupt from Acknowledge's body in massive amounts and only Natsu and Laxus truly understood the significance of that. Acknowledge was switching back to his humanoid form, where his power was all concentrated down into that tiny by comparison body. Immediately something shot upwards into the flames, diving into the very heart of them. A roar sounded far too close to comfort and every single drop of flames was thrown away by the shockwave, Acknowledge far too close for Natsu's liking. His flames rushed to reignite, the winds under his control bringing them back to dangerous levels quickly, but it was already too late to stop Acknowledge from closing the gap. They barely managed to push him back in time as Acknowledge swung at him, claws at the end of his half-transformed arms cutting across his chest and leaving large bloody gashes. Someone grabbed him from behind and immediately he was thrown away towards where Wendy was awaiting, darting towards him across the sky with a natural ease none of them could match. Within moments she was getting to work, applying her magic to the wound and repairing the damage done. Acknowledge was quick to notice too, but God Serena immediately blocked his path, having leapt up high into the sky and using wind to hold him up there. Not so fast. You've got us to go through first. God Serena stated as his wind magic began to disappear, water forming around his left hand while flames formed around his right. Kicking off the air, Acknowledge was immediately before him, but he still had enough time to detonate his magic, the flames and water mixing and filling the area with hot stream and allowing him to slip out of the way of Acknowledge's slash. Laxus and Sting rushed to take advantage of the opportunity, lightning blasting straight into the steam from one side while a mixture of light and shadows covered the other end. With a loud growl, Acknowledge forced his way out of the steam, the dragon wings he had formed against his humanoid form beating rapidly as he shot down towards God Serena's falling form. You dare to use such cheap tricks against me? Of course. God Serena shouted back with a smirk. Why? Does that make you angry? Well then try and catch me if you want me to shut up. Turning over in the air, he launched fire and wind back behind him, increasing his speed as he shot down towards the ground. At the last moment he ended his magic entirely and switched to a new one, the earth opening up beneath him and closing behind him. Acknowledge wasn't so lucky, his fist slamming into solid earth just meters away from grabbing God Serena. The others were already on him as he tried to shift his attention to the rest of them. Laxus struck first, his dragonified arm being swung forward, but in one swift move Acknowledge grabbed it and tore it away, the lightning that bound it to Laxus's body unable to hold up against the raw strength from the dragon. However, it had cost Acknowledge precious time in which Natsu had been able to close in with Toshiro, fully recovered and with flames spiraling outwards from his hands. Dragon Slayer's secret art, Heavenly Flames, Mode Sphere. Natsu roared out, bringing his arms forward and letting the flames spread out all around Acknowledge. He didn't let them settle, however, knowing he wouldn't have the time, and so instead jumped straight to the next step. Collapse. He roared as the flames shot inwards, hoping to roast Acknowledge from all sides. Acknowledge shot out from them before they could even finish compressing down on him, however, his fist slamming straight into Natsu's chest and sending him flying back. In the chaos, Toshiro acted, his sword swinging down at Acknowledge and releasing a massive wave of ice at close range. Most of it shattered against Acknowledge's skin, but a few pieces managed to leave small cuts. Acknowledge repaid the favor by smashing a fist against the ice that remained, breaking it to pieces and using the resulting shockwave to blast Toshiro away. Sting appeared before Acknowledge in that opening, his fist swinging up only to be caught by Acknowledge's open palm. It didn't stop the dragon from being pushed back a few meters before his feet managing to dig in. Trying to press the advantage, Sting brought his arm back as he swung forward with his other only for his fist to make contact with Acknowledge's own. His magic held out well, the two being held there briefly as their magic clashed and fought for dominance. But it didn't change the result. It was still Sting that was sent flying back, his hand broken from the blow. He didn't stick around this time, disappearing in a burst of light and speeding towards Wendy, the girl already hard at work with Natsu before moving her focus onto him. Seeing this, Acknowledge took a step towards them before his foot sank into the earth, the whole ground around him collapsing as he was thrown downwards. As he fell, God Serena shot up, propelling himself upwards with flames and wind before smirking as he shot a look back down. As he reached the top, he began to raise one hand, letting his flames die down as torrents of water took its place, beginning to fill the hole in an attempt to drown Acknowledge as the earth began to shift, trying to trap the dragon beneath the earth. It made little difference to Acknowledge. He pushed up out of the water and shot upwards, smashing through the earth. Catching God Serena by surprise, he was quick to slash his claws out, tearing away flesh from the side of God Serena's face as he tried to dodge and tearing an eye out with it. God Serena screamed as he clutched his face, fury held in his sole remaining eye as Acknowledge moved towards him. He only made one step though, his body being frozen solid as the water that coated his body turned to ice thanks to Toshiro's magic. Wasting no time, God Serena grabbed his ruined eye and leapt away, rushing towards Wendy's position even as she moved to meet him halfway. They'd only just managed to unite when the ice holding Acknowledge in place shattered, but Laxus was quick to step into the furious dragon's path, his arm reclaimed and the lightning binding it to his body picking up in intensity as he summoned forward everything that he could in that moment. Dragon Slayer's secret art. He roared, a familiar construct taking shape before his right hand. The lance of lightning glowed brightly as Laxus turned it towards its foe, stabbing forward as fast as he could to ensure it would reach their current foe. Thunder-piercing lance. Raising a hand towards the strike, Acknowledge caught the point of the attack against the palm of his hand, being thrown backwards as the attack tried to break through. Laxus struggled to keep the attack up, trying to make it break through before Acknowledge could regain his footing, but it was not to be. It only took a moment for Acknowledge to finally come to a stop, his hand holding steady as the attack tried to break through. Then the attack detonated right in front of Acknowledge, all the spell's stored energy being fired forward at that central point. Stopping the construct was an easy task. Stopping the magic at point-blank range, less so. A good chunk of it parted around Acknowledge, his hand separating it away, but the rest hit his arm at full force. When the spell finally cleared, however, all that Acknowledge seemed to show from the attack was some dark burns across his arm. The magic had failed to reach the rest of his body and the majority of the spell had been contained to such a small area, barely doing any damage to. That hurt, Acknowledge growled out, his words doing little to help repair some of Laxus's shattered confidence. Even so, he could see that his attack had done something. They had managed to hurt Acknowledge, even if it was just a little so far. So focused on that, he almost missed Acknowledge's next words. Is it my turn to use a spell like that now? Your turn. What do you? Laxus's words fell flat as he saw the first sign of magic come from Acknowledge, energy gathering around his fist in a very similar fashion. This feels right against something like you, muttered Acknowledge, tightening his hands into a fist before suddenly closing the gap between them and swinging it into Laxus's gut. Laxus felt his chest struggle to hold for a moment before the hand continued right through, coming out the other side as energy erupted against his skin. Dragon Slayers. Well, let's call this a punch, shall we? Without care for the damage he had caused, Acknowledge pulled his hand back out, Laxus falling to his knees as he clutched the area where the hole had been left through his chest. Raising an arm, Acknowledge let energy condense around it before swinging straight at Laxus's exposed neck. If it hit, Laxus was sure it would take his head from his body. He was lucky it didn't, though he would admit he hadn't expected to be saved this way. Indeed, who could have expected a dragon made of iron to slam straight into Acknowledge and forcefully push the monster out of the way? Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.